Well, good morning, everybody, and on behalf of my deputy convener, Councillor Kelly, and other members and officials, can I give you a very warm welcome to Falkirk Council's Planning Committee, which has been held in Grangemouth Community Education Unit, 69 to 71 Abbots Road, Grangemouth, today, Wednesday, the 17th of May, 2023. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, it has been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. First of all, can I ask if there's any apologies?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, we have apologies submitted by Councillors Murtagh and Flynn, and we also have a notification from Provost Bissett that he is attending a civic event, but will look to join the meeting when he possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That takes us now to a declaration of interest. It's item 2 on your agenda. And just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None? Well, I will declare item 7. I declared at the last meeting, and I'll do the same declaration, a non-financial interest in the item, as I know the applicant personally and I lived in close proximity to the application site. Having regard to the objective tests in Councillor's Code of Conduct, I advise that I require to excuse myself from consideration of the item and that Deputy Convener Kelly would chair this item. Thank you. That takes us to item 4 now on your agenda. But first of all, I'll ask if there's any questions in relation to the minute of the Planning Committee held on the 19th of April 2023. It's pages 3 to 8. Any questions arising from that minute, or can we agree the minute? Agree the minute. Thank you very much. Takes us to item 4. Partial change of use, first floor only, from public house to house of multiple occupancy at 95A Newlands Road, Grangemouth, for Amran Ali. This is a continuation as there was a site visit. It's pages 9 to 27 on your agenda. Before we bring in our officer for the overview of the report, could I just say that there's been a deputation request made by Councillor Nimmo to be received as a deputation in respect of this item of business. So the first item here is that we agreed that Councillor Nimmo is heard in respect of the item. Agreed to that. Fine, thank you very much. We'll now go to the report by our officer, Julie Seidel. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This application was considered by Planning Committee on the 16th of April, when it was agreed to continue consideration of the application to allow a site visit to be carried out. The site inspection took place on the 5th of May. Members viewed the application site and looked at the location of the proposed development and the surrounding site context. The site inspection took place during the morning rush hour to allow members to understand traffic volume and movements within the vicinity of the site, including pedestrian activity. At the site inspection, members were able to view the parking areas associated with the building, the position of the proposed ground floor lobby, and the condition of the building and surrounding site. Clarification was sought in relation to extant planning permission for the building, and it was noted that to the first floor, 8 offices comprising of 6 large and 2 smaller with communal tea room and welfare facilities have planning approval. Gemma, can you please show the car park layout for this application? The applicant has submitted an updated plan which shows the parking arrangement for all users at the site. I've asked the Roads Development Unit for additional advice in relation to this plan, and they've commented that the one-way aisle arrangement is welcomed. They also comment that the required number of parking spaces for the HMO is provided. However, they still have concerns about the width of the aisle at 4 metres not being enough for 90-degree square parking as shown. There is a roads officer meeting at this meeting if members have any further questions on parking. No matters were arising at the site inspection which would alter the recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Now an opportunity for Councillor Nimmo to step forward. You'll have 10 minutes, sir. Once you've finished your summary, then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask any questions of you.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I promise I won't take 10 minutes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for this opportunity to speak to the committee this morning. This, as everyone knows, is a planning application in respect to Grangemouth. It's perhaps worth pointing out at this point that with everything that's currently going on in Grangemouth, with the industry on our doorstep and the potential implications with the Greenport situation, which could mean up to 20,000 new jobs coming to Grangemouth, there are no Grangemouth councillors on the planning committee at all. I realise, Convener, that this isn't something within your control and it's down to the political parties within the council to deal with. But I think this needs to be given serious consideration going forward. We currently have 3 elected members in Grangemouth, myself being one of them, all with different political backgrounds. And obviously politics isn't something that we bring into the planning committee, but I think there has to be some serious consideration going forward regarding local representation on the planning committee. There needs to be something done in that respect. Convener, I called this application into the committee to the last meeting due to the number of concerns and complaints that I received from Grangemouth constituents, and the fact that council officers had recommended the granting of the application. I cited in my calling in notice the increase in traffic and noise that would be associated with this, which are legitimate planning issues. There are, however, numerous other issues that the committee need to be aware of before reaching a decision. At the previous meeting, Grangemouth Community Council had cited serious concerns regarding this proposal for an HMO, and I share their position in relation to this. Grangemouth already has more than its fair share of HMOs. It currently has 9. The rest of Falkirk is sharing 7 at the moment, and it's quite clear that the local development plan needs to be amended and should include an over-provision element when it comes to this type of application. Perhaps this is something that the committee and officers can take forward in the near future and come back with a solution. Grangemouth also has the highest number of flatted properties in the Falkirk Council district, in particular large blocks of flats. The continual increase in the HMO numbers will do nothing to help what is, in a lot of cases, a transient population. This will only add to the problem. We need to encourage individuals and families to move to Grangemouth and set up home, send their kids to school. HMOs don't do this. This application is not significant enough to warrant a traffic management survey, but there needs to be cognizance of the impact of the possible increase in traffic on the local school and the immediate surrounding area. And this is something that was highlighted by the public representation at the last meeting. They have very serious concerns regarding the impact on the local school. This is at the moment a very busy area and will only get worse if this application is granted. Convener, I sat through the last planning meeting and listened to the application being debated. The public deputation speaking against the application did a fantastic job in highlighting the relevant issues. I wish I could say the same about the applicant and his agent. They, in my opinion, failed miserably to sell their proposal. You must ask yourself why this has gone from a recent application to provide office accommodation to this application for an HMO. It's quite simple in my view. There's obviously more money tied up in an HMO and there's more profit in the provision of an HMO as opposed to an office. This does nothing for Grangemouth and its people, and it just helps to line the pockets of the applicant. Convener, I don't really have anything else to say in respect to this. I'm sure that the committee will reach the correct decision for Grangemouth, but if there's any questions from members, I'm quite happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nimmo, for your summary. Could I say the first set in relation to the representation within the committee, that's a subject you'll need to discuss with your own Labour group. Okay then, you've heard Councillor Nimmo represent his community. Is there any questions anybody would like to ask Councillor Nimmo at this stage? No questions? Okay, Councillor Nimmo, you could go back to your seat, sir.
Thanks very much, Convener.
Thank you. Before I open up our general debate, I know that we've got an officer from Roads here, and I would like if he would come forward and give us an overview of the perspective from the roadside. It's Craig Russell. Craig, you've heard the report coming forward from our officer. There is concerns in relation to traffic. I think we saw for ourselves that once if this goes ahead, then the fact is that it's going to be really busy going onto that main road, which is busy at this time. And what's your views on how you feel the justification in granting this? Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Convener. Our comments are reflected in the report. The national guide for development, which the council has adopted, doesn't contain a parking rate for the application type for HMOs. However, we've considered these to be similar to standalone dwelling houses, and we've advised that 16 parking spaces, in our view, are considered appropriate on that basis. Now, as noted in the report, there have been several applications at this site. This is an existing building. There was an existing use. There is an extant planning permission, so there were traffic movements associated with the building. As Councillor Nimmo has just said, the development is not of a scale where our colleagues in transport planning would be involved in this. So in terms of a comparison between traffic movements from the extant use and the proposed use, I can't give you that. Our transport planning unit normally get involved where a development comprises, 50 houses upwards, something of that sort of scale. They wouldn't be involved in a development of this scale. So I can't tell you whether this would generate more or less traffic than the extant office use. All I can tell you is that we've assessed this in terms of parking. The national guide doesn't contain a rate. We think 16 spaces are appropriate. As duly mentioned, there are 16 spaces shown on the site plan. However, the aisle width between these spaces, so between one space here and the opposite space, the aisle width should measure 6 metres wide. It doesn't, it measures 4 metres wide. So it's going to be more difficult getting in and out of these spaces. So our concern is that the aisle width doesn't meet the standard. 16 spaces may or may not actually be achievable on that site.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Craig, I'm going to open it up to members now. Would you like to come in at this stage? Councillor Redmond.
Just on page 15, 1.3, saying there is no definition of a house of multiple occupancy, HMO, in planning legislation. Part 5 of the Housing Act Scotland 2006 has amended defines a HMO as occupied by 3 or more persons, from 3 or more families, occupied by them as their only or main residence in some other manner specified by Scottish governments. So I'm just wondering, if we've not got a definition of a HMO, and then it's not saying it quite concrete, but saying their main or only residence, this sounds more like a hotel to me, because it's people coming to visit, maybe for what the applicant described last time, they'll be here 2 weeks, they'll be here 3 weeks. We don't know if it's just workers or could tourists book it as well. So is it competent to grant planning permission for something which isn't defined? And then what's the difference between a hotel and a HMO?
Thanks, Convener. The definition of the Housing Scotland Act is used, as you rightly said, that there is no definition in planning terms, but there are characteristics of an HMO that make it quite different. from planning uses like a house, a flat or a hotel. And the distinctions are where you've got 3 or more persons from 3 different families, so they're not living as a family. And the other distinction there is where there's shared basic amenities. So to take the example of a hotel, it tends to be shorter stays in a hotel, 1 to 2 weeks, and your room or your apartment in that hotel would be quite self-contained. HMOs have got individual rooms, and then they tend, like this application, to have a shared kitchen, shared living area and laundry facilities, and they tend to be for slightly longer stays as well, perhaps a month or sometimes longer. The actual end tenant that goes in and how that's managed is a matter for licensing to control. I don't know if Mr Henderson wants to come in at this point and comment any more on the crossover there.
Thank you, and I think I would simply agree with that. I've got the Scottish Government circular on HMOs in terms of planning and licensing sitting in front of me at the moment, and it does, as Julie had mentioned, say there is no definition of an HMO in planning legislation. But it then goes on to define per Part 5 of the Housing Scotland Act, which defines the characteristics that Julie has noted, and that is occupation by 3 or more persons, only our main residence, which takes it away from a hotel because someone would be staying there as their residence for the duration of their stay or perhaps work they were doing, and shared amenities, which is normally different from a hotel scenario. And it's probably just a useful point to make to the committee generally. I think it's important to be clear that there is a distinction between planning and licensing control over HMOs. And there are slightly different considerations that would need to come into account here. So, for instance, in terms of licensing, there can be considerations around, and I'll just read out a section, for the purpose of HMO licensing is to achieve and maintain high standards of service in this part of the private rented sector by ensuring that the HMO owner and any agent is a fit and proper person, and ensuring the suitability of accommodation. An authority in the licensing context may also consider whether granting an HMO licence will result in over provision of HMOs in a locality. Now, planning is about the use and development of land, so it's not about the user. And I suppose just an interesting point to make around that is another section of this circular is that where concentrations of HMOs, and I think Councillor Nimmo reflected this, are considered to have a negative effect on the amenity of a community, or where it's considered likely that such a situation may arise, planning authorities may adopt policies to manage HMO concentrations while ensuring that a sufficient supply of HMOs is maintained. They go on to say policies must be designed to safeguard community amenity and must not be in response to perceived concerns about the behaviour of tenants, which is bringing out that point around planning being about use and development of land rather than the user, and in particular concerns about the behaviour of a particular user. So sorry for maybe talking longer than was necessary in terms of the crossover from Julie, but hopefully that's of some assistance in terms of the distinction between planning and licensing in this context.
Thank you.
Convener. Thanks. I'd just like to add that I was under those impressions as well. However, one of the things that I also checked out was what you've actually got to do to apply to have a house of multiple occupancy, and that is to supply copies between the landlord and the tenants of tenancy agreements. Tenancy agreements, by definition under Scots law, usually apply for 6 to 12 months, which would make a nonsense of the landlord's assumption that he is going to be able to use his, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback here. He would be able to use his premises for the use of shift workers. So that would sort of take part. That would come under the auspices of the planning yet again. Oh, sorry, of the licensing yet again. There's one question I'd like to ask Officer the roads officer, and that is, if you don't mind, while I'm here, you say that the spaces are tight. They're about 2 metres short of what what the recommendations are. 4 metres wide rather than 6. Further to that, I have a wee bit of knowledge about the transient population that make up the subcontractors that use the premises round about this area, and most of them actually there will be undoubtedly there will be workers who will share vehicles, but most of them actually use works vehicles such as pickups. That obviously would make or cut down the number of spaces in that car park as well, probably down to about 10. So I think that's correct, isn't it? It would cut down that number quite significantly.
Craig.
Thanks, convener. Just to clarify, the issue isn't the size of the spaces; it's the width of the aisle. I don't know if it's possible to display the plan, the parking plan that was displayed at the start of the meeting. If it isn't, I'll do my best to describe it. The issue or the concern that we have, there we are. If you look at in the vicinity of spaces 1, 2, 3 and 4, down at the bottom half of the drawing, there's an aisle width there that's the dimensions is 4 metres wide. That's the distance from the front of those spaces to the building. That distance there should be 6 metres wide. And it should be 6 metres wide to allow a vehicle to be able to manoeuvre into and out of these spaces. So that's the concern that we have. But the point that the councillor is making is valid. In the event that larger vehicles do use the parking area, there may well be a reduction in the amount of usable spaces purely as a result of the size of those vehicles.
Thank you, Craig.
Okay, Dave. Julie, could I come to you in relation to just an issue that I still haven't got clarified in my mind? The description of proposal for the site location. This application relates to a partial change of use of 95 Newlands Road, Grangemouth, to form a house in multiple occupancy. The building was formerly the Elwyn Public House, I think we all remember that one, which has been subdivided in recent years. There is an established shop on part of the ground floor and extant planning permission to change the remainder of the building, currently vacant, into shop units, hot food takeaways and office. Now, if you're going to have that type of businesses in there, then obviously the people that are coming, they're all going to be coming usually in their own cars. So how does that marry up then with the fact is that the proposed change of use relates to the first floor of the building only? The proposal would develop 16 bedrooms. So if you've got 16 bedrooms, because the fact is that as far as I'm concerned, this is a major issue in terms of parking and road safety. What is the situation then in relation to the fact is that although we're saying we need 16 spaces, we've also got extant planning for shop units, hot food takeaway and offices that obviously are going to have employees. So obviously they're going to have vehicles. Could you maybe give us a wee insight into that?
Thank you, convener. I'll make a couple of comments and I think I'll probably pass back over to Craig in terms of the roads advice that we've had consistently with this building. As you rightly said, there's quite a mixture of uses on site of this building. There's an established shop that's operational that members viewed when we were down on site, and they were able to see the traffic generation for that use alone. There is extant planning permission for 2 other shop units and a hot food takeaway on the ground floor of the building, and then at the moment there is planning permission to convert the entirety of the upper floor to an office development. Now, the roads development unit have consistently raised concerns about the level of parking. However, we have tried to take a balanced view because it's an existing building, and when buildings are left unoccupied, they can become dilapidated and can also have an unacceptable impact on communities. There is parking areas to the front, the side and the rear. This application is showing the entirety of the rear area for HMO parking, and then the areas to the front would be for the remainder of the uses. I imagine that Craig would be of the view that there is inadequate parking to the front areas for those other uses, and I would probably just bring him in at this point to give a roads officer view on that.
Craig?
Thanks, convener. Yeah, just building on what Julie said, there is obviously planning history to this site as is detailed in the report. So if I try and go through the relevant parts of each of those and give you a sort of picture on parking requirements at this site. So the first relevant application is 12-390, and that concerned the part change of use of part of the ground floor of this building to the NISA shop, which is operating today. Yeah. The parking requirement for that shop unit was 8 spaces. There was then a further application in 2022 for change of use of the remainder of the ground floor, which concerned 2 shops and a hot food takeaway. The parking requirement for that application was 5 spaces. So we have a total parking requirement of 13 spaces for the ground floor. There was then, I think the same application concerned conversion of the upper floor to several office units. The parking requirement for the office units was 25 spaces. So it's quite a large parking requirement for office use. If you consider the number of people that can fit into an office, that's the reason why there's a large parking requirement for that. So there are indeed 16 spaces shown on the plan. We've spoken about the concerns that we have about the aisle width. We consider that there are 6 spaces available to the front of the building and 5 spaces available to the side of the building. So in total, there are 21 spaces available. Excuse me, sorry. The 21 spaces that we consider are available follows a site visit in which we counted 10 spaces to the rear of the building, not 16 as is shown on the plan. But if we assume that these 16 are provided, that's 16, 22, 27 spaces can be provided for a requirement of 25, 35. Bear with me, convener. Sorry, I've lost my figures here. I'm trying to just catch that. So back to that, sorry. As it stands, there is a parking requirement of 38 spaces for the consented use. All right. Now, that's not to say the consented use is what's reflective on the ground. What has been consented hasn't all been developed yet. That's what I'm trying to say. We consider that at present there are 21 spaces available. So there's quite a shortfall in parking.
I think that's the crux of the matter. Thanks for that. Julie, you want to carry on, or are you quite happy with what we've heard so far to Craig?
No, I think Craig sums it up. There's been a number of parking, a number of plan applications over a number of years which have incrementally changed uses and introduced new uses to that former public house building. It's a wee bit of a complicated planning history, but I think he sums up the situation well. Roads have consistently raised concerns about a lack of parking to serve the uses at this building. Yeah,
well, I think 21 out of 38 is quite a considerable amount. Okay, I'm going to come back to members now. Anybody else like to come in at this stage? Councillor Steenbank.
Thanks very much, convener. Can I just confirm, is the applicant there to answer questions? Otherwise I can direct it to officers, but with no expectation of no.
He was here for the agent was here for the first meeting, but he's not here at the moment.
Right, no worries. Just if officers know, if not, that's okay. How the applicant's intending on allocating spaces in regards to each individual flat, whether it would be essentially the rent for the space as well as the flat building, or whether there would be a distinct allocation system for the parking spaces.
Thank you, convener. We don't have any information on the management arrangements for those parking spaces. So I think what you're trying to ask there, councillor, is whether if you rent room number 1, you would then be given parking space number 1 or another parking space. We don't have that information in front of us. That would be for the operator to manage. However, they are shown on the updated car parking layout, which we've looked at this morning, that there's 1 space per room.
Thank you. Obviously, with the concerns about the adequacy of the spaces brought up, I thought that was just an important elaboration. I think Councillor Forrest asked one of my other questions, but I think I looked for some elaboration on our assessment of the National Plan Framework for Policy 14. So there's 6 principles under that: healthy, pleasant, connected, distinctive, sustainable and adaptable. I can understand the different interpretations that could be made, but my questions on the sustainable element, I think Councillor Nimmo as well as Grangemouth Community Council have brought up the issue about the transient population, and there's a specific reference within that policy to promote people living, working, playing and staying within the area in which they live. I'm just wondering how our assessment of that sustainable requirement in NPF4 Policy 14, just looking for a bit of elaboration from officers on that one.
Thank you, convener. It's quite a broad policy. It talks about successful places. It talks about sustainability. Our conclusion that accords with that policy is looking primarily at the fact that it's a reuse of an existing building. It's within an existing community. It's well served by public transport, access to work and public services, and that's where we draw a conclusion on that. Obviously, concerns have been raised about the number of HMOs within the Grangemouth area. That would be something that we would need to look at in terms of any future policies as part of our local development plan, that if we were concerned about concentrations and the impact that that could potentially have on communities, we would then have policies to control that. At the moment, there are no specific policies to control HMOs within any area of the Falkirk district area. Thanks.
No, I appreciate that. And I understand the NPF4 under that policy does have a balance to be struck. I think it's just an important point that has been raised, is that we need sustainable communities in regards to where people live and also live more in the broader sense. No more questions. Thanks, convener.
Hey, thank you, councillor. Okay, looking for Councillor Forrest. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, convener. Still slightly related to the vehicles. When we did the site visit, we were all quite aware of how close the housing is round about the Elwyn many years ago, and I know this for a fact, this used to be my local. I did have a number of complaints about late night noise. I think the neighbours that surround the area have probably had a couple of years where this premises have been lying vacant, where they've had some peace and quiet. However, what we are in danger of, I think, is passing this place off as a house of multiple occupancy that will be a source of noise and disturbance early morning, because as the applicant has stated, he wants to use the place for subcontractors for the shifts. They invariably start 6 o'clock in the morning, which means the bedrooms which overlook that car park are going to be disturbed with the noise from 16 vehicles starting up and going away. So it could be a source of problem there.
I'm going to bring Mr Henderson in at this stage, Councillor Forrest, just to address the issue that you've spoken about.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor Forrest. And it's a really interesting point that's been raised. I would just maybe make the point again that planning in terms of the decision making on an HMO, and I'll read out the statement, which was in relation to development of policies, which Julie had mentioned earlier. they're saying policies must be designed to safeguard community amenity and must not be in response to perceived concerns about the behaviour of tenants. And it comes back to the point around planning being about the use and development of land rather than the behaviour of the users at the tail end. So I think that's perhaps more a matter that would be picked up under the licensing regime rather than the planning regime. I only raise that as I suspect if we ended up with an appeal, the reporter would no doubt be saying, hang on, you're looking to a point that's not strictly a material planning consideration to take a decision on.
Thank you, Mr Henderson.
Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. A lot of the questions that was asked have been asked. I had one or two of them, but listen to the debate has raised another one, probably for Mr Henderson. So if this application was agreed, would the applicant still need to apply to the licence board for allow them to be in use?
Yes, the two regimes both exist in tandem, so there would be a requirement for an application to be made for an HMO licence. And that would, in most cases, follow on from a grant of planning permission, but not necessarily, but there would be a separate application for an HMO licence. Thanks, Councillor Kerr.
Probably one for Craig. With regards to, and you mentioned it, Convener, regarding the parking. So roads are saying that we've got 16 parking spaces. They have a concern regarding the space between the two areas. And it says we're 38 spaces. So if this was granted, are we saying that the shops, two shops at the front and the takeaway would have inadequate parking when it comes before the board again?
Thanks, Convener. The shops are already approved. So the Nisa shop is already obviously approved and operating. It needs 8 spaces. The other 2 shops in hot food takeaway are approved. As far as I know, they're not operating yet. So just to clarify the numbers, the Nisa shop requires 8 spaces. The 2 shops plus hot food takeaway require 5 spaces. That's a total of 13 spaces. Okay, so if we ignore the rear parking area for the moment, all those shop units and hot food takeaway need a total of 13 spaces. Now, by our count and double checking that with the drawing that's been submitted, there are 11 spaces present to the front and side of the building. So there's already a shortfall again if you exclude the rear parking area. Now the HMO, as I said, there's no parking rate in our guidance for that. However, we think it's appropriate to require a single space per room in the HMO. That's 16 spaces required for the HMO, and as you pointed out, Councillor Kerr, we have concerns about the aisle width there. So there's already a shortfall, and we're concerned that the HMO parking can't be accommodated to the rear of the site.
Just a follow-on question for that then, and I think you did mention it, Craig, with regards to if this application was refused and the 8 office units were taken forward as they have planning, what was the requirement for these office units, as in car park spaces?
The office units require 25 spaces.
I just find that difficult, because if it's already planned, or they've got planning and there's 16 there, so we've already given permission and there's no adequate parking, I just find that strange. But thanks, Craig. Thanks, Convener.
No, it's very good points, because I've got myself personally, I'm coming back to members, I've got serious concerns about the inadequacy of the parking overall. I went down there, we had set up the meeting on site for 8:45 to ensure that we saw it at its busiest. Now, I went there down early, 8 o'clock, and can I tell you that it was pandemonium with the amount of vehicles that was trying to get in and out of that shop at the side. Even when we walked right round at the back, we found that that was really busy with them coming in and out. And Councillor Porras said already about vehicles. It's no e-cars. There was a number of lorries that were trying to come in and out of that shop as well. Plus the fact is that we had premises across the road. That to me personally, at this stage, I think that the situation in relation to the parking, I would totally agree with the council roads officers that there is serious concerns here. I believe that there's a total inadequacy parking that could lead to serious problems, because one of the issues that we went down there so early for was to see the school children traverse from all areas there. And some of them found it difficult because of the fact is that vehicles were coming into that Nissan shop. They were trying to get out onto that busy road. There were school children trying to get by to walk up to the school, and you could visualise the problems. The fact is that quite clearly having 21 spaces with the possibility that it would require 38 is a large number, a very large number indeed. Also, the width of the aisles, 2 metres. 2 metres is a large area when we're talking about a congested area like that. And at the moment, I would like to formally move that this application is refused on the grounds of road safety issues and the total inadequacy of the parking that's going to be or trying to be available. Thank you.
I would second that motion, without a doubt.
Thank you, convener. It's been good to hear the debate. Strange how people who are not from Grangemouth can have a good debate about something in Grangemouth. And I'd like to say well done to the planning committee for that today. It's been a really good debate. I think when we look back, as obviously was on the planning committee in the previous application, I did ask why did that change so quickly. But it is what it is. I think we also looked at that time because you've got to get considerations, as I think as Mr Henderson occasionally says. And when it was the offices, we looked at the amount of people are now working from home. There's a massive change in that, in the way things are working, and I think that probably explains the reason why it was able to go ahead previously, because I think we looked at a different world following on from the pandemic. I think here we're in a different situation, and I think we've got to be a little bit more strict with the planning, with planning itself. I think Craig is very clearly outlined, and anybody that drives a reasonably sized car, and I wouldn't fancy trying to turn my car to park my car off an aisle 4 metres into a parking bay. It just wouldn't happen. But that really takes out 4 of the parking spaces. I think Craig's also already said that he's concerned that the 16 parking spaces is more likely. Maybe he'd be interested to see how they're going to do it, but it's more likely actually going to be 10 parking spaces for that. And I obviously didn't get a chance to come in the general debate, but I would just like to say that I totally agree with the refusal and planning on this, and it's purely on the fact that it doesn't comply with the turning circle, doesn't comply. The drawing might say 16, but our roads officer is advising it's probably going to be closer to 10, but very much also that some of the parking spaces that they're putting in just at the moment do not comply with the aisle space to actually then turn your car into, which should be 6 metres and it is currently 4 metres.
Thank you for your input, Councillor Bowes. Okay, just to clarify where we are, we have a motion moved and seconded that this application refused on the grounds that were given already in relation to inadequacy parking, road safety issues. Is there anybody? Yes, yeah. Just to say, is there anybody otherwise minded at this stage before we get a clarity from Mr Henderson? Mr Henderson.
Thank you, convener. It was just to clarify perhaps the wording as I had noted it, that planning permission would be refused by the committee on the grounds that the proposal would have an adverse impact on the amenity of the surrounding area due to a lack of an appropriate level of car parking provision, with the aisle space, or sorry, with the spaces as shown on the application plan not having a sufficient aisle space or an inappropriately narrow aisle space. And then I think you had gone on to note that the proposal would have an adverse impact on the safety of pedestrians, school children, presumably other road users, as a result of increased pressure on parking in the surrounding road network.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a fair summary of?
It does. I think everybody would agree to that.
Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Convener. It's probably no a question, more an observation. Probably leading on for Councillor Bowes with regards to the office units. It has permission for office units, and from the pandemic things have changed. I think the applicant was I think he's trying to get the best value out of his property, which I can't fault him for. 16 rooms, I think, is a bit much for the size of parking, and I understand why people have got concerns. I probably agree with everybody. But for the reason that yourself has given, Convener, I'm quite happy to support.
Okay, just to clarify once again, there's a motion being moved and seconded. You heard Mr Henderson in terms of the correct terminology and the reasoning behind the decision. Has everybody agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much for that. And thank you, Craig Russell. I think that it was very important that we heard you this morning on this issue. Thank you. Okay then, that takes us to item 5 on your agenda this morning. Construction of dwelling house and associated infrastructure at Airlie House, Caronvale Road, Larbert, for Mr Graham Fletcher. As a continuation after a site visit there, which was very, very useful indeed. Pages 28 to 48. Now, before we open up, just to say there's a deputation request being made by Mr Graham Fletcher, the applicant, to be received with the deputation to be heard in respect of his application. Are members agreed to hear Mr Fletcher? Agreed. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. That takes us now to our officer who will give the report. I think it's Julie again. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Convener. This application was considered by Planning Committee on the 19th of April when it was agreed to continue consideration of the application to allow a site visit to be carried out. At the site visit, members were able to view the location of the application site boundary and house footprint relative to Airlie House. Members were also able to look at the location of the proposed new vehicular access, wider street context, including the settlement pattern and architectural character surrounding. Potential impact on trees and hedgerows at the site were noted, and it was requested that the Council's landscape officer attend this meeting to answer any questions. Unfortunately, the landscape officer cannot attend today, but she's made a statement and comments that Airlie House is within the Caronvale Road Tree Preservation Order area. This TPO extends from South Primage Avenue at the north to the path beside Layside Primary to the south. It covers all of the properties on the west side of Caronvale Road and some properties on South Primage Avenue. The protected trees in the TPO contribute positively to the amenity and attractive townscape character of the local area. Local Development Plan Policy PE20 Trees, Woodlands and Hedgerows states that there will be a presumption against the removal of safe and healthy trees, non-commercial woodlands or hedgerows where such removal would be detrimental to landscape, local amenity, nature conservation, recreation or historic environment interests. It directs that in areas covered by a TPO, development will not be permitted unless it can be proven that the proposal would not adversely affect the longevity, health or stability of trees or their landscape biodiversity or historic value. If members require the full wording of this policy, I'm happy to read it out this morning. The Landscape Officer notes that the application is supported by information from the tree survey that was submitted from the previous application, i.e. it's somewhat out of date. The tree survey classifies the majority of trees at the site as category A or B. This proposal would require the removal of one tree, a western red cedar. This tree was classified as category C in the survey with an estimated remaining contribution of more than 20 years. It's a tall evergreen tree which contributes positively as part of the group of trees to the local area, and as such, the preference is to retain this tree. Category C trees are not high quality enough to be classified as A or B, but nonetheless are value within the context of the local area. Of the trees being retained, two are located to the south and west of the proposed house, a purple beech and a lime. Both trees are category A and have at least 40+ years of remaining contribution. The Landscape Officer has concerns that given the location of these trees and their proximity to the proposed house, there is likely to be considerable pressure in the future years to either remove or cut back these trees due to shading and or perceived safety risks. Such work would reduce the remaining amenity contribution of the trees and be detriment to the TPO overall. In addition, the revised layout shows that root protection zones of the trees would be encroached on during the construction period. The proposed development is therefore contrary to policy P20, and for those reasons the Landscape Officer is recommending that this application be refused. In conclusion, there are no matters arising from the site inspection or the last presentation to committee which would alter the recommendation to refuse planning permission. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's an opportunity now for Mr. Fletcher to come forward as a deputation. You'll have 10 minutes, sir, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions. I think you're well aware you had an opportunity the last time to speak as well. So carry on, sir.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, and thanks again for allowing this deputation. I know I spoke at length the last time, so I really just want to emphasise a few points, and I don't think it would take very long this morning of your time. So thank you for the deputation, and thanks especially to the council members who took their time to visit my property last week and see the proposed site. Your time is appreciated. There were two, and admit the planning officer said to me, subjective concerns raised specifically around tree removal and impact on residential amenity. So I'll just briefly address them in order. And as I hope you agree with my viewpoints this morning, and I'll give you the opportunity to obviously answer. I'd like to answer any questions that you may have. First point is around the removal of the western red cedar tree. This is a picture of it here, right front and centre, and I know people online might see it better, the picture there, but it is a, excuse me, it is a, as I say, it's a western red cedar tree. It's not a native tree. It is a fast-growing evergreen. It's native of Pacific Northwest and North America. It's got multiple tree wounds, and it's a category C tree, which is a tree that has no material, conservational or cultural value, and that is as stated in the professional report. I showed this proposal to the Senior Planning Officer, Elspeth Forsyth, prior to submitting my planning request, and she expressed no concerns with the removal of this tree and was happy with the fact of the positioning of the new property. However, I do want to state that we do take the TPO and the area in question very seriously. I think the treescape and the landscape of the area is important. And with that, I want to state that there will be excessive replanting. So for the removal of one tree, we're looking to put in at least another 2 trees has been confirmed, and these would be of a minimum height prior to planting and of a native species, not harmful to local wildlife, something like lime. So it would be excessive replanting to really compensate for that. There's 100+ of this cedar tree already in the garden, and I've already recently replanted a couple. You might have seen them in the hedge at the front that I replanted recently. There's also really sensitive consideration around the high and moderate trees. So I've increased, there was a previous application that was rejected, and I increased the tree protection zone to over 50% greater than it previously was, which was set at the minimum recommended guidelines. So I took the guidelines into consideration, and then having shown that to the landscape officer, we decided that it would be acceptable to increase that. Tree and root protection would be provided during building work. You know, there is appropriate measures to do that. And if you look at the top picture there, it really is integrated by design. As you notice, it's an L-shaped property, and that is specifically to allow the landscape to fit around the trees and things on the site. So in summary, the TPO, as is stated, is designed to protect trees which make a significant contribution to the landscape or townscape, and I urge the planning committee to agree with the professional survey report provided that this evergreen cedar does not do this. And in fact, with excessive replanting of native deciduous species in the proposal, the overall treescape would improve in the area. So that's my first point. The second point raised by the officer in the original report was around tandem developments and the impact on residential amenity. So just before I go on to that, I think obviously there's natural heritage to the area. So obviously I've discussed that with the trees, but there's built heritage as well in the area. So this is not a list. Laird House is not a listed property. It's not in a conservation area. And as you may have seen from your visit, especially if you looked at the roof, it's not necessarily in the best of condition either. This is not a tandem development. You can see clearly on the map, this is what we call an infill development. There is a plot is to the side of Airlie House. It is not in front. It is not a tandem development. And if it was, I think we'd really struggle to say anything about it was unacceptable. As if you look at, just to summarise the neighbourhood, you've got a large beach mount house. Sorry. Since I was last here, I've had to get glasses since my last meeting, so apologies. But you've got Beachmount House at the front with the properties right in front of it and round it. You have Woodcroft House, a neighbouring Airlie House with a large property immediately in front of it. You have my property, and at the top of the site here is Torwood Hall, former care home. And as I say, I think I stated the last time, Paul Ketterick, the head of Invest Falkirk, has actually had his name on an article recently which says it's an acceptable proposal for 9 bungalows in the grounds of Torwood House. And I've seen the plans for that, and that is, you know, properties all around that he states was appropriate at that time. So I do not feel that anything that I'm putting in there would be classed as inappropriate in any way. This is just a couple of pictures just to give you an idea of the space for those who weren't on the site visit. I know those who were would have seen there's a very long hedge along the front, sort of 90-metre hedge along the front. And within the new build property, there would be 0 overlap, just to emphasise, of Airlie House, which is a 40-metre long building. And I've got further supporting photos if you'd like to see them. I say, just to finish off, around the design and things like that. That wasn't mentioned in the report this morning, but obviously it was addressed in the notes. So the design and positioning is just as per neighbouring properties. This is a neighbouring property that you may have seen. It's an earlier supporting building, which is actually very similar in design to the proposed new property. It's same sort of colouring, roof type, height, etc. And this was an earlier pattern of the area. And it's also should be added that my property has been designed by the same architect who designed the neighbouring house at 38 Cairnvale Road, with again similar designs, colours, patterns, materials, etc. in use. Yeah, maximum exposure of Airlie House, 0 overlap, and again, just to say, I don't think it would be a much detriment to the garden. We're retaining for one flat, we're retaining over half an acre of grounds. Final point on the slide there is obviously just about the existing outlook as well. So there was a statement about the outlook from Airlie House. It should be clear that all the living spaces within Airlie House face the south side of Cairnvale Road, not in towards the development. The only thing on the facing the development are bedrooms and hallways. And there's also very limited view of the property, of the new build potential property, just due to existing landscape, land drop, etc. And I should probably just to be clear on that, there is no concerns from either of the occupants of Airlie House number 1 or 2 about this proposal. They have both expressed no, obviously I'm one of them, but the other has not expressed a concern about this either. So really, that's the summary of my second point, tandem development and impact on design. I don't feel that any of these areas can be classed as unacceptable, and I hope you agree with that. So in summary, I've addressed the 2 main concerns that were raised by the planning team, specifically the impact on the TPO and the impact on residential amenity, and I hope you agree with my points of view. I do appreciate there are other aspects to planning decisions, and I might not have addressed them specifically as they weren't raised as concerns, but if you have questions about them or anything I've covered today, I'm very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, sir. There's now an opportunity for members to ask any questions of the applicant at this stage. Any questions to the applicant at this stage? Councillor Bowes.
Thank you. Mr Fletcher, and just a question on the trees, and has been raised by council officer already, about the concern for the purple beech and the lime in the future. You did say you would be doing something about root protection. Can you maybe expand on what you're going to do on the protection of these category A trees? I'm not saying that the whole of this application depends on the trees, but I wonder if you just maybe develop that a bit further.
Yeah, there's a few things. So one, the purple beech, which is to the west. If I don't know if you're on the site visit or not, but it's to the sort of the top of the site. I tried to mark where the boundary of the property. So the first thing we do is we retain the purple beech fully within the ownership of the current property of Airlie House. So it would not be under pressure for or to reduce the possibility of cutback. And it should be added that obviously these trees, for anything to be changed or cut back on them requires council permission. It is part of the TPO, and the planning, the landscape team will confirm that obviously any work I've done, I always do contact the landscape team prior to making any cutback. So it's their decisions to make them on that, and if they felt it's inappropriate, they have the ability to say no. There is a matting that goes around the trees to protect root protection from any heavier goods or weights, which can be put in place during construction. And there is a fencing that goes around the trunk or the stem of the tree to prevent any potential damage from that way. So it's fairly standard procedure to protect some quite attractive trees, admittedly, during that time. I should also probably point out that lime has already got permission to be cut back substantially in line with it, because it might notice it's kind of short a little bit. I don't know if you saw it. It's kind of very tall and thin. It's got permission to be cut down to 25 feet or something like that, in line with the other trees that are on that boundary already, to make it a more attractive site.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions?
Just on you're talking about the compensatory planting. Could you maybe expand on that a little, and type of trees, and are they just small saplings, or are they?
No, as I've done previously when I've had to replant removal of dying trees, the agreement is placed to put the trees at least 2.5 metres of height in place at time of planting. Yeah, and these would be of a local species such as a lime, which is non-harmful to bees, etc. within the area. I'm happy to take guidance from the landscape team, obviously, about other alternative planting, but certainly minimum height and native as opposed to evergreen.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from members to the applicant at this stage? Councillor Kerr. Any other questions to the applicant at this stage? Nope. Okay, sir, you can take your seat. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, we'll open up to a general debate, because I see at this stage I thought that it was very important to go out and site to have a look here. The applicant has spoken about tandem developments, and members did take an opportunity to walk along the edge of Caronvale Road to see other developments that maybe you could look at and in comparison with his application. So it was very beneficial, and obviously our planning officer gave us a lot of history, not just on that site, but also on the whole area. And as I said before, I thought it was a very, very good site visit. I'm going to open it up to members now in relation to any debate, general debate. Yep. Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's just one question for officers. Within the definition of the NPF 4 Policy 6, are Category C trees defined as veteran trees?
Julie.
Thank you, Convener. I think that would be a question that we would really need our landscape team to answer. I don't know if Ian Dredden, if you...
Yeah, I think Julie's really point. I think I would say probably the meaning that you're looking at, they are established trees. Obviously, the character, the quality of the tree is reflective of the Category C BRAs. I think certainly they're established trees, and probably the context of what you're looking at, I would probably say, in the absence of what's the landscape officer, probably are veteran, but they're established trees. So they clearly are long established. But obviously, as we heard, there's different categorisations, so they have been long-standing.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm just trying to understand the interpretation of Policy 6 here. Therefore, under Policy 6, does that say anything about established trees of this nature, or are we to interpret it within this sort of broader scope of Policy 6 of ancient woodlands, ancient and veteran trees?
I think what I would say, Councillor Steinback, clearly, obviously, we are still, along with many planning authorities and the planning profession, obviously trying to interpret and come to conclusion on Policy 6 and other policies. And clearly, you will get sometimes differences of opinion, but I would have to say my professional view is that Policy 6 is relevant here in this context.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Steinbank. Councillor Bowser.
Thank you, Convener. Just coming to yourself, Julie. I've taken the arguments on the trees, and I'm not actually going to ask you about trees. You'll be pleased to hear on this one. So Mr. Fletcher has given his presentation, and I think he said it in the previous one and said it in this, that about the tandem development and how his property doesn't cross over the line, but on 7A14. We're saying that it does, and always take the advice from yourselves. Can you expand on that a little bit, because I think the trees is part of this, and I appreciate what the tree officer has said. I wouldn't have refused this just on the tree problem. So I think if we can maybe develop that side of it on this, because this is not recommended for refusal purely on the trees. There's more to it. Can you expand that a little bit?
Jim, I don't know if it's possible to show the site plan for this application just while I'm speaking. So tandem development is defined as housing within the grounds of an established house. I think the one we're all familiar with is backland development, where a house is built in the back garden of another house. This one's slightly unusual in that the proposed house would go to the front of the property, as you can see here. And in terms of the positioning of this tandem development, you can see that the plot and the house have been reduced slightly since the last application stage. It's slightly smaller footprint, slightly smaller plot. And you can see that the house itself, the top gable of the proposed house is lining up with the bottom gable of Airlie House. It lines through, but you can see that the plot actually does overlap the front of Airlie House. And you can see hopefully see there from the dotted line that's drawn through, that plot itself would line up approximately with the front bay window of Airlie House. And that lower flat, the outlook from that lower flat, which is actually in a different ownership. So we're of the view that there is still an overlap, but as a form of tandem development, and that then calls into, gives us concerns in terms of outlook from existing properties there, and then the impact on the setting of Airlie House itself.
So and just as I'm getting this right, so the differences in what we were talking about, the house itself, the actual built house itself, it's in line, so probably wouldn't be overlapping, but the overall development, which includes garden space as well, does overlap.
And the concern that we would have is, at the moment, it's shown that, you know, I think in the plans it says below boundary enclosures. Over time, I don't doubt for a minute that any future occupants might want to put in a higher boundary enclosure. They might, under permitted development rights, then add extensions, porches, garages, sheds, and over time, the outlook and the level of development clutter that you could potentially get to the north, to the top of that plot, could severely impact the amenity of existing properties at Airlie House.
Okay, and just a question, and I know that it would be another application, but if that building was to move, by the looks of it, about 2.5 metres south in the line of the garden to move would that remove that?
Clearly, we would need to do a full assessment. My concern is that it would still be a form of tandem development. It would still be impacting the setting of Airlie House, which is not listed, but it is a handsome property. It is of local interest. In the planning history, going back some time, with the reporter's decision where they commented specifically on the characteristics and qualities of Airlie House, and it would erode that the sweeping front lawn with those specimen trees. Moving development further south would potentially also have more of an impact on your category lime tree to the south of the site, okay, which you can see there, and that's possibly why it's only moved slightly. So I think our concerns would remain even if that was to be amended.
Okay, I think you know where I was going with that, but thank you for that, and it's good to get that as a description, because as I said, I just had a feeling that this application was going on the result of the trees rather than the overall result of this. Thank you for that.
Hey, thanks, Councillor Dowes. Before I bring Councillor Kerr in, I think it's been mentioned this morning quite a bit in relation to tandem developments, and members on the site visit took an opportunity to go along Caronvale Road just to see the previous, what we would say, building history in relation to other buildings that had been there for some considerable time. The question was also asked, and once again you touched on it, Councillor Dowes, was the fact is that we're not dealing with an application here in relation to one tree, which is it's already been described as a C category, not a high quality. So the decision that members taken today isn't based on the fact is that there's one tree there that's a C category, it's no high quality, and therefore we shouldn't really take cognizance of that when we're determining this application. The fact is that, as already been stated, this has been before committee some time. This is the first opportunity that I've really had, although that's part of my ward, to actually have a closer inspection of what's been referred as tandem developments. And we took the opportunity to do that at the site visit, and I thought it was very, very beneficial. Councillor Kerr.
Were you looking at my notes there, Convener? Are they binoculars you've got on, Convener? Similar to yourself, Convener, as I drove you there because you're sore back, and I asked Julie when we were on site about the house next door, because there's a large house at the back and a house next to it, and Julie explained that that was in the 1980s stroke, early 80s, late 80s. Then we proceeded to go down the road further, and there's houses. For every big house that's down that road, there's a development in front of it. Every big house down that road. So I find it strange that we're using that as a refusal. We talk about, you've mentioned the cedar tree, a class C. We don't like taking trees down unless it's Westfield Roundabout. And I think that the applicants addressed a few of the questions that was asked, but I'll wait to hear the rest of the committee. Convener.
Okay, thanks for your input, sir. We're carrying on the debate here. Councillor Redmond, I seen your finger going to the light.
It's kind of similar to yourself and Councillor Kerr, Convener. I think, you know, we've heard there's one tree going, it's a category C, only have compensatory planting, and by the sounds of it, I don't know if this is my big question off the back yet, but as part of their building warrant, will that be enforced? They need to have 2 metres, and with the type of tree being enforced as well, because I think that's quite if we're losing a category C tree, but we're getting 2 quite high quality trees, would be quite good. As well, knowing the area quite well, and we've done a lot of leafleting in that area during the election. There's a lot of big houses, and most of them do have development in the front, right in front of the house, actually, not even to the side. So I don't really see that as much of an issue. I think it's kind of characteristic of the area is a lot of big mansions were built, and over time the gardens of these mansions are too big for people to maintain, so they've the houses have been subdivided and the gardens have been sort of subdivided as well. So it was just that, and then just maybe a question on the replanting. How do we enforce that? Again, if the officers would maybe know.
Thank you, Convener. The replacement tree planting predominantly would be done or carried out within the remaining garden ground of Airlie House. Because of that, because it's within the sort of blue line land ownership area, we could put on suitably worded conditions to ensure that we get the details of trees to a standard that we're happy with, details of the location, and a timescale for those being planted. So I'm quite content that if members were minded to approve this application, that could be addressed by planning condition.
Thank you. That sounds quite good then. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and it is something that we've done in the past. We could put on a condition to specifically limit the height or the type of boundary enclosure that goes in, or we could remove permitted development rights in relation to boundary enclosures, so that any change in boundary enclosure, they would need to make an approach to the planning department. The concern with that over time is that planning conditions do tend to get lost, you know, with change of ownership, and you can find in the future that you have breaches of conditions that can sometimes be quite hard to enforce. I think Ian's like to comment.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think Julie's raised the point, there are conditions, obviously there's certain criteria have to apply, but what I would suggest and what I would say, that when you're obviously considering imposing a number of conditions, you've got to find that balancing question, and then the question is, putting those conditions on raises the questions about, well, possibly maybe adding such conditions like removal of protected development rights. Is the principle of the development correct in the first place? And that's the debate we're having today. Is again, you've heard officers and a competent officer's views, understanding clearly committee's views, but when you start to pose additional conditions, and as through time and actually the challenges of maintaining and enforcing those conditions is a challenge. But also the question is, putting a number of conditions on in the first place renders the question, is it appropriate, the principle of development in the first place? And obviously you've heard officers this morning on what officers' views are.
Councillor Forrest.
Sorry about this, Julie, it'll be another question for you. Probably, still being fairly new to the committee. The cedar tree is protected by a TPO, and we can get rid of that one to allow the development to go ahead. And the applicant has stated that he'll put in 2 others, but these 2 will not be protected by TPOs. And as I understand it, the new owner of the property could cut those 2 trees down in year, 2 years, 10 years time. Is that correct?
It would have been a really good question for the landscape officer. My understanding is that any new trees, particularly if they were put into a high standard, which is what we would expect, they would become protected by the TPO. They would benefit from that protection moving forward. The applicant mentioned that he has had meetings with our landscape officer, giving advice on trees at the site, and I'm sure that if there were any new trees on site, we would ensure that moving forward those were protected in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sinclair.
Thanks, convener. It's just another question. One of the points within the report is the planning history for the site being a strong material consideration. The 2 most recent applications, are they similar in nature to this application?
The most relevant recent application is, I'm just going to go back so that I can put the correct number. So the most relevant recent application that the members will be aware of was planning application P210025 FUL, which was for the erection of 1 dwelling house and associated infrastructure at the site. This application is a slight reduction in that previous one. They're both very similar applications. That application was refused on the 6th of April 2021. There was a local review for that application, and we refused that on the 29th of April 2021. So that would be the most relevant one. You will see that there's been quite a bit of planning history going back to 2007 for pressure to build in the front of Early House, and that has been resisted thus far. The reason that it's been highlighted that it's a strong material planning consideration is just how recent that 2021 refusal was, and the fact that it was tested at appeal and also refused. And there's not, in my view, a significant change with this current proposal that would lead us to make a different recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think it's worth noting just now, just in case I forget this, that during the applicant's summary, he mentioned the fact that he'd been speaking to a council officer who had told him that there was a planning application coming in for along the road for a number of units in front of another house in that area. We're unaware of that. We're here to deal with this application, and I would ask everybody not to take any cognizance of that. Thank you. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, convener. I think the person mentioned was Mr. Kettrick, but I think that was to do with a recent one with the sale of property and things like that. I think he'd actually read it somewhere. I don't know if he'd actually met him. But looking at this, I understand it's going to be Bronze Active. They're looking to build at, which is one of the levels which we built to. And which I understand is actually, I mean, you get, there's obviously bronze below that, but that should still include solar panels, some sort of. I find it strange then that the report's saying that doesn't come up to the standard report. Where is it? Proposed development improve the quality of the home. This policy to provide more high quality, affordable and sustainable homes. I know Silver 1 2 is quite significantly better. I'm asking a question here, and if we were to go with it, could we put a condition on it that it goes to Silver 1 2 rather than Bronze Active, which would probably make it a more sustainable home?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to here is some of the MPF4 policies, which, as you'll be aware, are really placing quite a great deal of focus on sustainability and the climate and nature emergency that's before us. So some of the ways that we are assessing our applications and we're phrasing and the assessment that we need to go through is slightly different from our current local development plan. But for an application like this, we would normally put on a planning condition anyway in terms of low and zero generating technologies, because we need to understand what exactly is proposed, the calculations that they're going to make, their 12% reduction, and then how that's going to be implemented. So often at this stage when a planning application is submitted, until they go through the building warrant stage, they often don't know the final details, and we would be content with a condition if members were minded to approve this application.
So we could condition it to look at the slightly higher standard. Yeah.
The condition is a fairly standard condition, so it's the 12% reduction that we're looking to achieve. But obviously, the fact that we would need to purify that condition, we would look very carefully at what was proposed and ensure that we're satisfied with those details. Would that
help to deal with? Because I know it's saying that it doesn't conform. Would that help to deal? Again, I'm trying to come away from trees. Would that help to deal with that where it's saying it's not really conforming?
I think there's a bit of tension at the moment in terms of, and you can jump in, what's required in terms of MPF4 and often the level of information that we get with applications, particularly where it's just one house, and that can come through in the policy assessment. Ian, I don't know if you've...
Yeah, no, I think we're in this period of transition, as you're all aware, of interpreting MPF4, which sets a fairly good wider strategic parameter, but the devil in the details really in your local development plan, which, as you know, the embarkation process of moving forward LDP3 started, but we've still got LDP2, your development plan, which is just under 3 years old, which is still a relevant and material up-to-date document. So we'll have to find that balance between the aspirations of MPF4 and the policies you've currently got just now, which are still relevant. So we have to find a happy medium here. And I think there's got a degree of pragmatism in what we ask for.
Any further?
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come to site meeting. I had another appointment that morning at St Bernadette's with Councillor Sinclair and a couple of, I think it was one or two other councillors there as well. But fortunately, as I've lived in the area for 28 years now, literally on the main street round the corner from it. I don't know the applicant, but I do know the area extremely well. My daughter went to Ladeside, must have walked that road, I don't know, many times. So I, like has been said already, there is a number of properties down there which have had developments in front of them. I think for myself, I'm looking at the difference being here is a line of the garden rather than a line of the building. And I think looking at, yes, the sustainability, I think that tackles that side of it. And I find myself moving more towards considering approving this. And my reasons for that are if we can ensure the sustainability of it. I think when you look at the other buildings, particularly if you go south from where this site is, you'll see a number of houses to the front of the larger houses. Yes, there is a plot just been sold which is going to be respite homes. It's not just homes, it's respite homes, I understand, at Canville House. So I'm going to propose that we approve this application. I might be the only one that does, but I'm going to propose that purely in fact I think we can deal with the sustainability thing. And I think by condition, I think that's one of the things I'll be very strong on with it. I think we can, I personally would say I know the area and there is a number of developments to the fronts of some of the other houses. I will put in the tree part as a category C tree that will be removed, and it is also non-native species. I think the assurance that Mr Fletcher is given on how he's going to protect the other trees matters, and I agree that we never know what's going to happen in 50 years, 100 years with things, but hopefully the tree protection order for the area will still be in there and people will do the reasonable thing and actually go through the proper systems to make sure that these things are protected. So with that, I'll stop blathering. Hopefully you understand why I want to reverse this, not based on the tree. The tree is important, but I think protection for the native species or the trees, what was it, a purple beech, and I hadn't heard of purple beech before. I'd obviously heard of a lime, but I think the protection for them is very important. But I think it's in keeping overall with the area. I think it probably it's getting close to the end of those potential types of developments, because if you come up from Ladeside, there has been a good number of them as you go. So I am going to propose that we approve this application.
Before I bring Mr Henderson in, just under the due process, we've been joined just lately, a few minutes ago, by Provost Bissett, who has been out on a civic duty. And Provost Bissett will realise that he's not been part of the debate or the hearing for this particular item, and he'll take no part in the decision making. You understand that, Provost? Okay, thank you. Mr Henderson.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks for picking up on the issue, understanding orders of third-party interest decision-making, and thanks, Provost Bissett. I think the only point I was going to raise in relation to the motion that's been made is I think I've noted that it seems to be in line with the settlement pattern of the area. There's other examples. You're satisfied in the trees. You've looked at conditions around tree planting and so on, and climate mitigation and adaptation. One point, as you'll be aware, I'm always keen to bring in is that the visual impact of a property is an important planning consideration, and it was just to try and capture that. Are you as the mover satisfied with, for instance, the scale, design and location of the dwelling house that's proposed within that site?
I am, because if you look at some of the other developments, they're quite dramatically different. There's one which is white render with a cedar on the outside of it, and some are traditional. Yeah, I don't think we and there's nothing wrong with the colour pink, but I don't think we want pink walls with flashing lights on it. But but it's keeping to a reasonable standard for the local area. But so yes, I don't have any concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes.
Councillor Redmond, I know you've been waiting. Councillor Redmond.
just wanted to kind of echo what everybody else has been saying. I think we've had a really good, thorough debate about this, and obviously the site visit, and I think we've been really prudent with this, and I'd like to second Councillor Bows's motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Redmond. Just to clarify where we are, we have a motion by Councillor Bowes, seconded by Councillor Redmond to approve the application. Is there anybody otherwise minded or anybody else like to come in at this stage?
Yes, Convener.
Councillor Steenbank.
Yeah, again, I agree with Gary and Jack on this one. It's been a good debate and we went thoroughly, and I think it's been quite marginal. However, I'm going to move the recommendation on this one. I think the clarification given by officers on a lot of the points, the trees issue, we got the professional advice on that, but as well as on the quality site and on tandem development, as well as in policy 16 quality homes, that it didn't indicate the house would be a type of accommodation. I wasn't able to make the site visit, but like Councillor Bowes, I'm a Larbert boy and a relatively recent graduate of Ladeside. I know the area quite well. I do think that I'm going to move to refuse on this one.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, we have a motion moved and seconded to grant. We've now got an amendment by Councillor Steenbank to refuse. Anybody else like to come in at this stage? I've got a seconder for Councillor Steenbank.
Convener.
Councillor Sinclair.
Yeah, I'd like to second Councillor Steenbank's. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So we have, I think we know the situation here. We have a motion moved and seconded to grant. We have an amendment to refuse, moved and seconded. So we'll just go straight to Mr. Henderson for the vote. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Convener, and I'll do my best to narrate what I'd noted by way of the motion. So we had a motion by Councillor Bowes, seconded by Councillor Redmond, that the committee would grant planning permission, and I would note there as it's considered that the following material considerations are of such weight as to indicate that the development plan would not be accorded priority, and these would be the settlement pattern within the area is varied, and there are examples in the vicinity that provide support for the proposal. I've noted also that the committee is satisfied as to the scale, design, materials and location of the proposed development. Also that the impact of the tree protection order is considered acceptable and appropriate replacement planting shall be required. And then there would be conditions, presumably that would be delegated to the Director of Police Services to put in place appropriate conditions, which would include, I've noted conditions around tree planting, the boundary height limitation, which would either be by way of a straight restriction on height of the boundary or removal of permitted development rights in relation to the boundary, and condition in relation to climate mitigation and adaptation. So that was the motion. The amendment is to agree the officer's recommendation to refuse the application, and that was by Councillor Steenbank, seconded by Councillor Sinclair. So in the basis of a roll call vote, Provost Bissett's not taking part in decision making on this item. So then we have Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Colley. Councillor Flynn is absent. Councillor Forrest.
Motion.
Councillor Kelly.
Amendment.
Councillor Kerr.
Motion.
Councillor Murtagh is absent. Councillor Redmond.
Motion.
Councillor Sinclair.
Amendment.
And Councillor Steenbank.
Amendment.
Thank you. I have noted 6 votes for the motion and 3 for the amendment, and the motion is duly carried. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, everybody. Once again, that was a very, very good debate. That takes us to item 6 on your agenda this morning. Construction of 2 number temporary buildings and change of use of existing ground to form parking and yard area part retrospective at All Truck Group, Carring Grange, Part, Skinflats, Falkirk for All Truck Commercial Vehicles Limited. It's pages 49 to 62. Now, before we ask Kevin Brown, our officer, to come in, there is an application to be made by Mr. Peter Hogan, the applicant, and Mr. Hugh Campbell, the agent for the applicant, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item. We agreed the deputation? Agreed, thank you. Our officer to present the report will be Mr. Kevin Brown. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Convener. As you've said, this is a part retrospective application seeking planning permission for the change of use of farmland to form an extension to a commercial vehicle repair yard and the construction of temporary vehicle repair buildings for the All Truck Group at Carring Grange Park and Skinflats, Falkirk. Jack or Gemma, I'm not sure who it is that's in charge of that today, but could you please show the existing and proposed block plan drawing? Thank you. You can see from this drawing the existing previously consented yard area outlined in blue, with the extended areas outlined in red. The existing plan on the left shows the unauthorised works carried out to date, and the drawing on the right shows the intended layout and building positions. Gemma, if you could please move on to showing the workshop elevations and floor plan drawing. Thank you. This is just to give members context as to the type of building that's proposed. The applicants indicated that they're seeking temporary consent for these to be located on the site for a period of 5 years. There is an existing concrete base already formed at the site, as shown on the layout drawings, and these are proposed to be used as vehicle repair areas. Could you please move on to showing the site photographs for members, please, and just scroll through those as you go, if you could. Okay, so this gives you an indication of how the site is finished, and predominantly in hardcore areas. This is a view looking north from the centre, round about the centre of the site. That's the existing suds pond within the centre of the site that serves the development. And this is shows the existing buildings on the site, and to the right of that, just behind the All Truck van that you can see there, is the proposed location of the new buildings and the concrete base, which is already formed. I think you'll maybe see that in a future photograph. Yes, so you can see that there. I think there's some further down, which give you an indication of the boundary treatments which are proposed, and as installed on site is palisade fencing, about 2.4 metres high. Thank you very much for that, Gemma. In terms of consultations received, these are summarised in section 4 of the report. Attention here should be drawn to the response from the council's flooding team. It highlighted a lack of detail in respect of drainage arrangements for the site. I've had discussions very recently as this morning, which indicate that they've now had another chance to have a look at that, and they're happy at the proposed drainage arrangements show a capacity for the site area that's now taken into account, but they do have general concerns about the overall position of the suds pond in relation to it being located in a floodplain. The consultations also refer to a SEPA response, which has issued an objection in principle to the application in respect to flood risk. Since drafting the report, and as recently as the last couple of days, we've had further correspondence from the applicants and from SEPA in an exchange and an attempt from the applicants to address the concerns of SEPA. SEPA have responded to this further submission of details, reaffirming their objection in principle to the proposals. The applicants have, as recently as last night, submitted further correspondence in relation to the comments from SEPA. We haven't had a chance to get any further comments on that, but as things stand, SEPA are retaining their objection in principle. It seems to be focused generally on the issue of flood risk and how that's assessed against the terms of National Planning Framework 4. In terms of representations, we've not received any letters of representation on the application. Assessment against the development plan is set out in 7A of the report. The relevant policies in there are all highlighted, and the application is assessed as being contrary to National Planning Framework 4 and LDB2 policies in relation to development in the countryside, development in the green belt, flooding and drainage, and landscape impact. There's not considered to be any material considerations that would outweigh the development plan considerations in this instance, and the officer recommendation is for committee to refuse planning permission for the reasons outlined in section 9 of the report. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Kevin, for your summary. It's now an opportunity for the deputation to come forward. Mr. Hogan and Mr. Campbell, is it both of you or just one of you? Would you like to come forward, sir? And you'll have 10 minutes, but if you could just maybe introduce yourselves and what your designations are to this company so members are aware. Thank you.
Good morning, Convener, Councillors and Committee. I'm Peter Hawking from All Truck Commercial Vehicles. My colleague, Hugh Campbell from Campbell of Doon, would like to present this PowerPoint on behalf of All Truck Commercial Vehicles.
Good morning, Matt. Sorry. Good morning. My name's Hugh Campbell. I'm a chartered civil and structural engineer who works for a company called Campbell of Doon, who are consultants based in Crieff.
I'll just pass this over. Right, yeah. All Truck Commercial Vehicles. What we do, we provide a range of specialist services to over 500 Scottish businesses, fleet maintenance and all associated statutory undertakings. We employ 57 staff members, operate 18 mobile vans, including 3 electric. We are a one-stop shop solution, in-house vehicle servicing and repairs, MOT preparation and presentation. I lost that. I've lost that. Sorry. MOT preparation, and presentation, vehicle diagnostics, auto electrical repairs, fleet management solutions, leasing and rental solutions. We are Scotland's lorry mounted crane specialist. Workshop and mobile repairs, annual testing, R&M packages, crane sales and FASS's only Scottish crane dealership. Opportunity to establish a Mercedes commercial vehicle dealership serving Scotland. The proposals will complement the 4th Green Freeport ambition, research and development training on alternative clean fuels, supply Mercedes parts, provide our services to an extensive Mercedes customer base. What this means: increased employment opportunities for 30 new staff, apprenticeships and training for skilled workers, contribution to carbon net zero as a new generation of electric, hydrogen fueled commercial vehicles is rolled out, a prestigious truck and the world's largest truck manufacturer brought to the Falkirk area. This is our Carngrange Park premises. As you can see, this is our purpose-built workshops and offices passed by Falkirk Planning. The view southwest towards the M9. M9 embankment and existing screen planting along the southern boundary side. The location within the Falkirk LDP Green Belt, National Planning Framework 4 states a development proposal within the Green Belt will only be supported if it's an identification of an established use. This is the case here. And on highlighted blue and next to the main workshop is our proposed position for our temporary buildings. Why here? An extensive review of the FK postcode area was undertaken by Business Gateway, all truck, and no suitable buildings options out with the green belt were found. The company is already a well-established business at the site. The site has an A road access and is minutes from the M9. Proposed buildings will be of similar scale to the existing established buildings on the site. Landscape planning to be undertaken if requested. A visual appraisal was submitted to Falkirk Council on the 23rd of February 2023 and we are awaiting a response. The proposed buildings are clustered and adjacent to the existing structures. They are screened to the south by existing building, established screen planting and by the M9 embankment to the southwest. Before I hand over to Hugh, may I say, this is a great opportunity to future-proof our business with the new technology going forward. It is a great, will be a great lot of new jobs, financially support the local economy. We have a bit of limited time on to try and achieve this. Mercedes-Benz truck manufacturer want us to try and go live on June. Can I hand you over to my colleague, please? Thank you very much, convener and committee members.
Thank you, convener. I want to start off talking briefly about flood risk and water management. First of all, the buildings proposed on the site, the temporary 5-year life buildings, will mainly be composed of aluminium and plastic, so they're basically flood resilient and flood resistant. Falkirk Council, in a response on the 2nd of March, stated that no further action was required in terms of flood risk for the site, and they sought clarification about drainage. And we did submit on the 15th of March a further drainage impact assessment, which we've had comment on this morning. And that, apart from the one point about the Suds Basin flooding, in a 1 in 200 year flood, is the only point which we can address. And it's a kind of slightly nebulous point, because if you've got a 1 in 200 year flood, the whole of Scotland has a problem, not just a little Suds pond. But that's by the way. Upon issue of the committee report, we became aware of an objection letter from SEPA dated 15th of March, which we had not seen before. But subsequently, we've actually corresponded twice with SEPA and your officer, Mr. Brown, to try and clarify matters on that. So just very briefly going through the planner's recommendations, there's 4 points: a contrary to policy on green belt, 2 contrary to policy on business development in the countryside, 3 contrary to policy on landscape, and 4 contrary to policy on flood risk. Numbers 1 and 2, green belt and development in the countryside, have already been dealt with by Mr. Hogan, and basically our view is that they're not appropriate, because this is development of an existing business and not a new business. As far as point 3 on landscape is concerned, a full landscaping plan and assessment has been submitted to the council. I've said there with no response. That's not a negative comment, it's just that we're assuming that the council are happy with it because they've not responded to it. And the nub of the matter is item 4, which is policy 22 of the National Planning Framework on flood risk. I've gone the wrong way. Yeah. Planning framework was introduced on the 13th of February of this year, which was during the planning application period. And it splits flooding into fluvial, which is river flooding, pluvial, which is rainwater ponding and hollows in the ground, and coastal flooding. And I just want very briefly to deal with each of those. In terms of fluvial flooding, which in the case of this site is flooding from the River Carn, the site doesn't appear on any of SEPA's flood maps, either for 1 in 200 year plus climate change or 1 in 1,000 years plus climate change, so that for river flooding, the site is clear. Moving on to coastal flooding, unfortunately, you probably won't be able to read any of this because of the size of the text, but I'll talk through it. It's known that the site is prone to predictable coastal flooding, from tide tables, the cycle of the moon, etc. And the 1 in 200 year extreme seawater level predicted by the National Oceanographic Centre in Liverpool for the year 2018 is 4.66 metres. And this figure agrees with the figure that SEPA have for the same return period coastal flood event. Where we differ from SEPA is that they want to add 0.86 metres to that level to take account of projected changes in sea level from today to the year 2100, so at the end of the century. And our fundamental point is that these are 5-year life buildings, so we should be proportioning the rise in sea level that's predicted to the length of time of the 5 years relative to 80 years. And if you make those adjustments for the temporary buildings, the predicted coastal flood level it's actually 1 in 10 years, which is actually slightly worse than 1 in 5, but we don't have the statistics for 1 in 5. The flood level is not 4.66, but 4.22. And the climate change addition is 54 millimetres, which is relatively small. So we end up with a flood level relative to these buildings, which are subject to planning application today, of 4.254 metres above on datum. Now, the office on the site, which gained planning from Falkirk Council last year, has a finished floor level of 4 metres. So the flood level that these buildings, subject to the current application, would be subjected to in their life is only 254 millimetres above that floor level.
You're on your last minute, sir. Thank you.
That's fine. The Grangemouth Flood Defence Scheme doesn't affect the site. It starts and stops short of it. And just for your information, the highest recorded tidal level at Grangemouth Docks was in 1959 at a level of 4.47 metres, just to put that into context. And the last slide is, this is a map from the National Oceanographic Centre, and the blue square right in the middle is the nearest data point to Grangemouth Docks, and the blue arrow, it's giving you the 4.66 level, which is the 1 in 200 year coastal flood for Grangemouth, and there's a box at the top where if you add 0.86 metres that SEPA are looking for, you get a level of 5.5 metres. And as I've explained, our view is that that addition of over 100 years isn't appropriate for this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much for summarising both of you. There's now an opportunity for members to ask any questions of the two gentlemen here. I'm going round the table. Councillor Sinclair.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. The first one, the relationship that you currently have with is it Mercedes-Benz? Is that an existing relationship, or is it one that's developed, or is developing into a new relationship?
No, this is a brand new opportunity. It's been put on the table to us with the new renewable energy and new commercial vehicles, electric and hydrogen, that are getting pushed forward.
Okay,
and basically approached us to see if we could cover Scotland.
Okay, thank you for that. Given the nature of that, then the application is for a temporary use for 5 years. Do you anticipate that the relationship would last longer than 5 years?
Yes, we do, but because of the short window we have to implement this, This is the reason we're going for temporary buildings, obviously flood resistant, carrying out all the necessary obligations to mitigate any risks. And what we really need for our workers and engineers is obviously shelter. And these vehicles, a lot of vehicles you can work outside and work on them, but this type of vehicles you basically have to have overhead coverage. Now it's just basically shelter. We live in Scotland. It's a wet country. We just need to protect our employees.
Thanks for that. And just okay, no, thank you for that. Thanks for that.
Thank you for your input, Councillor Sinclair. Any other questions for the two gentlemen at this stage? Councillor Redmond.
So you were saying about the you employ 57 staff. Is that exclusively at this site, or is that over the whole Scotland?
57 at that site.
All right.
Yeah, between the two workshops and the office. And we have extensively interviewed and basically earmarked another 20 employees so far, which basically are just ready to go to come if we move over to Mercedes.
And how long have you been on the site for?
Oh, we've been on the site for one side nearest to Kerrsbridge for over 6 years. We were actually in Bonnybridge originally, and we moved down to Grangemouth, obviously space and obviously traffic movement as well, and developed a site, and we are basically to be honest, we were really quite happy with the way things were going, and then this opportunity came up, which is a one in a lifetime opportunity for us and for the local economy. It would be very beneficial.
That's good. And then in the years you've been at the site, have you had much bother with flooding?
We have no flooding at all. We're quite friendly with the neighbour, who's a farmer, second generation. He's been on the farm himself for 56 years. He has never had any flooding. We've not actually had any flooding. There is a main drain which boundaries the property, and basically it was obviously put in with the council at one time when they actually made the motorway. It's a main ditch which is very deep, and in the ditch there's a 400mm main drainage pipe which basically takes all the water away, takes it down into the cairn, and at the bottom of that pipe there's a non-return valve which basically lets all the water escape, and when the tidal comes in it closes the valve. Falkirk Council maintain this.
Thank you.
Thanks for your input there. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you. I have some experience in flooding. I spent a lot of time in Cumbria in 2010 and 2015 where they had a 100-year potential for flooding to happen, yes. And it happened twice in 5 years. So I don't always hold by the how many 100 years. You said, Mr. Hogan, and I just want to clear something up. You said that the buildings would be flood resistant. I noticed that Mr. Campbell, and I probably agree with him, flood resilient is completely different from resistant. Resistant means you're resisting the flood. Resilient means you can recover easily. I assume you meant resilient rather than resistant.
Yes, pretty much.
Yes,
so the whole concept is that the flood goes into the buildings uninterrupted and then leaves again.
Leaves the building. Yeah, they're basically glorified marquees. They'll have main shutter doors. I mean, if hopefully not, if we get any flooding, there'll be minimum damage. Basically, trucks can be removed, staff, and it would just dissipate as quickly as it came. And it wouldn't damage any of the buildings that's there. Even the office has got flood resistant material up until it's basically 1.5 meters high. Everything in the office is made of flood resilient materials.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that. I've worked with the Environment Protection Agency down south, so I'm quite aware of that. I just wanted to clear that up for the committee. One of the important things, though, for myself and I, is you're contained within the Cascadere and Christ ward, and obviously to get the potential of the 30 jobs. When would they I know that will obviously take time to build, but when we would be looking at the potential for those new jobs to actually start to appear?
I can guarantee that will be started within the next 2 months, and all those positions will be filled. I will prove that.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. Have we any more questions for the applicant and the agent? Provost Bissett.
Thanks very much, convener. I just wondered that we approved the other building April last year, I think it was. Can you recall if there was any issues with flooding at the time? Because was that discussed? I can't recall that.
Yes, yes. You can answer.
So yes, we were the consultants for that building as well, and the same discussions and consideration of flood matters took place then as well. And it was decided that I think it was 1.2 metres from floor level up the walls had to be made in this case of flood resistant materials, but materials that could quite easily be replaced in the future, and electric sockets, etc., were left higher than that flood level.
Aye.
Because these buildings, all the services will be left higher anyway in the workshop. Right. All the tools will be up. You maybe want to speak something about.
Yeah, all the services are maintained at a very high level. It is for safety in the workshop too, and easy access to power points and whatever. The floor level is basically all concrete. The building is a steel structure. The main building is a steel structure, and obviously the water can flow through easily if it did. What we look at is, I totally understand if this was housing and there were people in it and living in it, yes, there is a risk, and obviously you would want to take that risk. But we feel the risk is very low for all the benefits it brings to the local economy and our company. We will do anything we need to do, as in extra sub-spawns, additional drainage, whatever's required, we will put that in place if required.
And did you say the finished floor level was 4 metres?
It was 4 metres, yes.
4 metres?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Have we any more questions for the applicant and his agent? No? Okay, gentlemen, you can retake your seats. Thank you. Okay, before I open up for general debate, it's just one point that we've got to clarify and ensure that you're aware of. When SEPA put an objection into a planning application, if the issue is not sorted out, then if members were minded to grant, then it would be referred to Scottish ministers. I'm sure you'll be aware of that one. Okay, thank you. Now going to open it up for general debate. Obviously, we heard a good summary from for the applicant and his agent in terms of the economic benefits. We've heard from our officers and we've seen the report in relation to the concerns that they have. So, Provost Bissett, followed by Councillor Bowes.
When we granted the other one last year, I don't mind there being any particular issues around flooding. I remember it being discussed, but I don't remember it possibly going to be rejected because of flooding, and I don't see what's changed between last year and this year. There is a flood risk down there. I mean, if there's a flood, the BP's in trouble as well. So I really don't see it as a risk as it is for everybody until we get the flood protection in place. So I just wonder if officers had any comment on the flood risk at all.
I think we've got an officer here. Would you like to come forward, sir, and just give us an overview, your perspective of the situation? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, convener. My name's Aaron Moyson. I'm the acting flooding coordinator with the council at the moment. From our point of view, when we looked at this originally, the first application came in previous to the additional information. The site, we did note that the fact that there was a flooding issue on the site already and there was a flood risk, as pointed out by SEPA as well. However, on balance, when we looked at it, we felt that a flood acknowledgement statement was preferable to a full flood risk assessment, as existing buildings were already on the site and we weren't increasing the flood risk through the addition of any new structures here, and it wasn't increasing the risk to any nearby properties on that respect. I would note that there is a few questions we would have over the location of the suds pond, as it does appear to be within the floodplain as it is, which would be against our guidance at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Provost, any other questions? Councillor Bowes.
Couple of things, and I'll go to Aaron first. Sorry, that's better. A flood acknowledgement statement, I assume that's something which is supplied by the applicant, that they acknowledge that there's a flood risk to the area. Also, we've got SEPA's in principle objection, which is unusual here, but I suspect that an in principle objection probably covers most of that side, sort of Grangemouth, coming straight up through Skin Flats, even get up as far as Earth. There's a potential of, and that in principle would go on any of them. Is that correct? Is that they would put that to any land on there, but with the flood acknowledgement, then that puts any responsibility from any damage on it to the business itself?
I believe that the SEPA what's we're looking for, objection in principle here is to do with MPF 4 and their interpretation of that. So I'm not 100% sure to comment on this. Sorry, I'll let Kevin probably answer this part more accurately.
Yes, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think touch on what Councillor Bissett, Provost Bissett raised in the last point. What's changed from the previous applications is essentially the adoption of NPF 4 and a more stringent approach in NPF 4 to even our previous approach locally towards flooding and flood risk elements. So SEPA have issued this objection in principle. There has been an exchange of information back and forth, as I said, just recently with SEPA, and they've maintained that objection in principle. My reading of the situation is that's unlikely to change, even with further information from the applicants, although we can't obviously guarantee that. It's really relating back to what NPF 4 says about flood risk and their opinion that we shouldn't be developing on any floodplain at all. So that's essentially where it comes from. We would need to have further discussions with SEPA if we were to seek removal of that objection. But I'm not sure if that would be the case or not, to be honest with you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Councillor Bowes again.
Yeah, sorry, the flood. They didn't mention the flood acknowledgement statement, which was brought up there. Can you just confirm exactly what that is? I have got something else to go into beyond this.
Sorry, yes, Councillor. The flood acknowledgement statement submitted by the applicants, essentially, as it says in the tin, that acknowledges the risk and risks involved. That's come about from it was previously SEPA guidance notes, which refer to flood acknowledgement statements being a potential tool, if you like. I think the issue here is perhaps that the adoption of NPF 4 has superseded, in SEPA's eyes, perhaps even some of their own guidance notes at this current point in time. As has been referred to earlier in this meeting, that there's a bit of a steep learning curve with NPF 4, and there's still an element of not just planners, but obviously the hydrologists within SEPA, for instance, as well, also finding their way through how to interpret various elements of NPF 4. And obviously at this point in time, they're interpreting it as that they feel they need to object to the application on a grounds of principle, as opposed to the sort of minutiae detail of flood risk.
Thanks for that. On the suds ponds, does that need to be, say we were to approve this today, does that need to be covered in this application, or is that something that the planning department can take up directly with all trucks outside this planning application?
Looking at application site boundaries as shown on the drawings, the suds pond is actually outside of the red line application boundary for this application. That would essentially mean that fundamental changes to that suds pond could require planning permission in their own rights. What is proposed is essentially a widening of the suds pond. It's in the same contained location, if you like. It would really be an assessment of whether, in terms of suitability of that, would come back to detailed considerations about flood risk and so on. But yes, they probably would require a separate planning application for the suds pond element itself. Because it's outside of the application site boundary, we wouldn't be able to condition that aspect. It would need to be a separate application.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, so that if whatever we were going on this, if there was conditions, but it sounds as if it would be a separate application. It's something that planning would obviously maybe have to look at, dealing with all trucks themselves on. I've got to say that I will make sure in 2 months, if this does go ahead, I'll phone Mr Hogan and ask him who all the staff are. It's something which I think we're needing. I think that the fact that they're using it at a particular development is going to be on the EV side of things, and given what we've got happened, just announced in Larbert with the extension Alexander Dennis to EV buses, although Larbert's not quite in Cascade and Trice, it sort of feels like it is at times. It makes that sort of area, it sort of develops that area and I think this is something that I think is very, very positive. I think the flood acknowledgement statement is very important, but I think also that the commercial importance of this possibly, or in my mind, it does override this. It's potentially bringing a really high class business development into the Cascade and Trice ward, and obviously extra employment, and very, very soon, as we already heard. I would like to propose that we accept this development. Obviously there can be further debate on that, but I would like to propose that this is not refused and that it is actually accepted.
I'm totally in agreement with you. I think when we heard the summary for the applicant initially, it showed, because I remember that when they were in Bonnybridge and they had problems up there with logistics because their site was close to schools, and there was an awful lot of situation developing with parents because they felt that vehicles going up and down High Bonnybridge was a safety factor, and they moved down here. They've been very successful, we heard, and hopefully they're going to be more successful. And in terms of the economic benefit for the whole area, then I'd be happy to second your motion, Councillor Bowes. Provost Bissett, followed by Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. I was just going to come in and second the application as well, but I fully support it. I think the deputation showed that they're trying to mitigate against any flood risk by sort of raising everything up. So the ground level is 4 metres, and they're putting all the sockets and everything higher up. So it is a risk, but it is a good economic development as well. And I wish them well. So I'm happy to support it, Convener.
Thanks, Convener. Probably a question for Kevin. Having looked at the plan history, I went back on and looked at the previous applications, and I would say for the refusal for plan permission number 1, policy P Greenbelt for a local development plan, and policy 8 for Greenbelt for the National Plan Framework 4 would have been appropriate at that time. But we've already got the development there. With regards to number 2, refusal when the applicant therefore represents an unjustified development in the countryside with the urban and village limits, I would have thought again that would have been appropriate at that time. It's already an established business. Then the third one, that the refusal on number 3 mentioned the visual impact. In the previous application, officer agreed that the proposal would not considered to be unacceptable in visual amenity terms, as the building is very similar to agricultural buildings. Number 4, most people have discussed the flooding. The flooding situation won't go away, convener. If, as been stated before, if all trucks gets flooded by the 200 years flooding, the rest of Falkirk's knacker. So they'll no need to worry about their sockets. Everyone will be flooded. And I know every application is taking on their own merit. And I know that the new National Planning Framework 4 has thrown up different aspects of our policies. I just find it strange that on both previous occasions, officers supported this application, and this one we haven't. And it's Kevin's prerogative to get his decision on what's available to him, and I appreciate that. But like yourself, Provost, like the Provost and yourself, Convener, and Councillor Bowes, I will be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Would anybody like to come in just to clarify where we are? We've had a motion by Councillor Bowes, seconded by myself, to grant this application. I'll go to Mr Henderson in a minute just to give us the legalities in relation to SEPA. Is there any? Councillor Colley.
Sorry, Convener, I can't hear Councillor Colley from online.
Can you hear her now, Councillor Steenbank?
No, just yourself, Convener.
Okay, just yourself. You want to change mic? We're going to change mics for you, Councillor Steenbank.
We'll try that one. Is that better?
No worries. Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, I think it's a general concern around this, the more stringent approach in relation to National Performance Framework 4, and the statement we should that SEPA believe we shouldn't be developing on the basis of that we shouldn't be developing on any floodplain, and I suspect that if that is the case, then we're going to see this is a reason for objection with huge amounts of development in the Falkirk area. I wondered, just in general, probably in relation to the council as a planning authority, what discussions they may have with government or SEPA in terms, because it really could create a significant blockage in the Tivy and things like the investment zone and the Green Freeport and things like that, which are major developments but significantly potentially affected by flooding if there's a 1 in 200 year event. So I just think it's something that we potentially need to address.
Yeah. Thank you, Kieran. Yeah, I think Councillor Colley's raised some valid and pertinent points there, and I think that's the thing that clearly, as you've heard already this morning, the last few committees with the approval of MPF4, obviously it's now your development plan, and obviously what I would say for clarity, the Chief Planner has said in the interim that where you have maybe some policies in your current LDP2, which is also part of the development plan, where the policies maybe there's tension between MPF4, LDP2, MPF4 takes precedence. What is now the main part of that document. But I think you're raising some valid points. It's something we're all going to have to get a grip of, and certainly as we move forward into LDP3. And I think it's all about societal risk and also recognising that the goalposts have moved. And it's also mentioning that we can't do much with what's already happened, but we don't want to exacerbate or increase that risk and that's what they really, and it's coming out to say we can't continue to do what we're doing, and we have to look at particular areas that are vulnerable, that we have to look at a different strategy and approach. And you're right, in terms of new development, investment, we have to look at that very carefully. Equally, in the context of Falkirk Grangemouth, as we know, we have the small matter of a Grangemouth for protection scheme, which has a lot of work going on. So there's a lot of work going on just now with the green free ports as well, but we have to take of MPF4. It's emerging, and you've heard this morning with SEPA's objection being a statutory consultee, they have interpreted that line. The point I will only make from obviously following from Kevin, what Councillor Kerr raised about the analogy of your house. I wouldn't use the word saturation points, maybe not appropriate, but a threshold can get reached, and it's when you reach that threshold, maybe you can't continue in your house, where you have to maybe move to another house or another location, and that's something we have to take cognizance of as well. And I think particularly with MPF4, which we're all trying to grasp now, but I think clearly, as in the case would appear this morning, there's got a minded to grant, because it would have to be a minded to grant subject to a referral to Scottish Ministers, given that we have an objection from a statutory consultee. It will be interesting to see, should that scenario pan out, what reaction we get from Scottish Government. So that will be probably a test case happening across the country. So that's
contribution. That was a. Is there anybody else like to come in at this stage? I'm going to go to Mr. Henderson in relation to the issue. Obviously, Councillor Steinbanks, but I must apologise because you're so far away. I would need a telescope to actually see the wee yellow hand coming up. So do apologise, but carry on, sir.
No problem. Thank you very much, convener. I think that the contributions there from Ian and Councillor Colley are very proper at this point. I think that I do agree with other members. I do see this as under NPF4 an intensification of an existing use, though we do need to keep the flooding risk in mind. So I do apologise if this has already been stated, but I do feel it's been a good and sort of long debate on this one. At 7.13 in terms of the drainage plan submission, can I just get some clarification on whether those have been submitted or still required to be submitted, and at what time would that be? Would that be a condition that we could potentially add to any minded to grant decision, or would that come at the stage of Scottish ministers eventually approving after the deal with SEPA? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. The position with the drainage arrangements is that we have now received drainage plans for the site, and these have been reviewed briefly by our flooding colleagues. The difficulty we have is that the proposals are for works which are out with the site application site boundaries and which require planning permission in their own right. So we can't necessarily place a condition on there. The applicants would need to submit a planning application to form the extension to the sludge pond, which in itself is relatively well contained, and it doesn't create a massive difference in terms of the overall site area take up by the pond itself. But yes, it would require a separate planning application as opposed to a planning condition.
No, thank you very much, and I think managed to answer questions which have satisfied that the flooding risk, whilst still there, has been mitigated through this debate. No, quite happy to support the minded to grant motion by Councillor Bowes. Thanks, convener.
Okay, then before we go to Mr. Henderson, just to clarify the situation, with a motion moved and seconded to grant the minded to grant the application, is there anybody otherwise minded at this stage? So we're totally agreed to that. Thank you. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, convener. And first of all, I would just like to clarify the core reasons. And from my notes, I have the economic and employment benefits arising from the development, satisfied on visual impact of the proposal, satisfied in relation to flood risk matters, and it would be considered an intensification of an existing use. So these were the 4 points I'd noted, and I think it's important to capture these because, as the convener was mentioning quite correctly, this would be a minded to grant decision that would be subject to referral of the the minded to grant decision to the Scottish ministers under the terms of the 2009 Notification of Applications Direction. Now, the effect of that is it would go to the Scottish ministers, are minded to grant, and they would have a period of 28 days, as I recall, and my planners can keep me right, to decide whether or not they would wish to call the application in for further consideration, or whether they would hand the matter back to the authority to issue permission. Is that
extend that period to be complete? No, but you're right, there's a time frame, but it can extend that period.
Thanks, Ian, and that's as a result of the outstanding objection by SEPA in relation to the flood matters. So my notes here are that the committee would be minded to grant planning permission, which I think is probably important to note and was raised many times, is temporary for 5 years in relation to the 2 temporary vehicle repair buildings. Yep. And that would be as the committee considers that the following material considerations are of such weight as to indicate that the development plan should not be accorded priority. And then we have the reasons being 1, the economic and employment benefits arising from the development, 2, the committee is satisfied on the visual impact of the development, 3, the committee is satisfied in relation to flood risk matters, and 4, the application is considered an intensification of an existing use. And presumably that would be subject to conditions, appropriate conditions as determined by the Director of Police Services. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Now, obviously, let's say we're past our 2.5 hours. As you know, at the very beginning, I did declare an interest in the last item, so I will remove myself, and the Deputy Convener will be taking over. So at this particular stage, it's an opportunity for you to decide amongst yourself. Do you want a break for a half-an-hour break for lunch? 10 minutes. Are you happy with 10 minutes then for a comfort break? Take the... Okay then, and thank you. Good. Fine. Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Afternoon, gents, ladies. Thanks to the convener for his earlier work, and I'll take over this one item, which is construction of an agricultural workers dwelling at land to the east of Loch Green Farm for Mr. J. Haddo. This came up at the last meeting on the 19th, and the application was asked to be reconsidered after we get further information. We have a deputation from Mr. Pearson, who's the agent for Mr. Haddo. Can we accept it? We accept the deputation. Agreed? Agreed. Okay. So as I said, you will recall that this application was considered by the Planning Committee on the 19th of April and agreed to consider today. Can we ask Brent Vivian if you will continue with the information now?
Yeah, thank you. As you've just said, members will recall that this application was considered by the committee on the 19th of April, when it was agreed to continue consideration of the item to the next committee in order for officers to seek from the applicant additional evidence and information to demonstrate that there is an essential need for the proposed dwelling house to support the management of the rural business, and in particular, evidence in relation to the labour requirement and explanation of the alternative methodology to the handbook proposed by the applicant. The applicant's agent has provided a response in relation to those matters, and I would refer you to paragraph 2 of your report, which provides a summary of the agent's further submissions. The agent's further submissions note that the applicant has been operating Loch Green Farm since 2000 with hired help. The application itself is accompanied by a supporting statement from the farm labourer. It states that he is self-employed. Sorry, he is a self-employed agricultural worker and has been working with the applicant at Loch Green since 2016 and has been working full-time with him since January 2021. Since the committee previously considered the application, officers have further information on the planning history of Loch Green Farm, and that history is set out in paragraph 4 of your report. The dwelling house granted outline and detailed planning permissions in 1997 is Hawkie Dub's cottage, which is lived in by the current applicant, who is the farm manager, and this cottage adjoins the farmland. The Section 50 legal agreement was concluded as part of those earlier planning permissions and restricts occupancy of that dwelling house to a person or persons employed in the business of agriculture on a full-time basis, together with his, her, or their dependents in all time coming. The file for one of those relevant applications contains a letter from the Scottish Office Agriculture and Fisheries Department, which provides the information outlined in paragraph 6 of your report. This information provides useful context and points to the subdividing and selling of parts of Loch Green Farm since 1994, including dwelling houses and farm buildings. At that time, Loch Green Farm extended to 181 hectares and is indicated in the current application as comprising just over 31 hectares. The previous information also indicates that the council accepted at the time a labour unit requirement of around 1.6 to justify a second dwelling house based on the scale and nature of the farm enterprise at that time. The applicant's further submissions provide further information in relation to the long-established farm enterprise and the farm management handbook. However, these further submissions are not considered to fully address all the points highlighted in the previous report to committee. No evidence or information has been provided to fully substantiate or explain the applicant's agent's labour requirement calculation of 2.13 persons. Notably, the farm labourer's work includes 233 hours described as miscellaneous, and there are no details of what this entails. And there are no details to explain over half of the labour attributed to the farm manager. The applicant's agent consents that the farm management handbook is used to help in assessing or setting up a new farm enterprise. However, no evidence has been presented to indicate that use of the handbook is not relevant to an established farm enterprise, and the applicant's agent's own submissions refer to the handbook in the labour requirement assessment. The labour requirement is 2,762 hours, equating to 1.45 persons using the coefficients in the handbook. The standard labour requirement for a farm is 1,900 hours, which for 2 persons is 3,800 hours. In terms of the handbook, this figure is not met. As advised in the previous report, the applicant's labour requirement assessment states that both the farm manager and the farm labourer live off-site, which presents difficulties for the operation of the farm in accordance with welfare regulations. However, the farm manager lives in Hawkey Dub's cottage, which is next to the farmland and subject to an occupancy restriction. Given the location of this house and its occupancy by the farm manager, it is not clear why there might be operational difficulties in terms of welfare. The planning history referred to indicates that a labour requirement of 1.6 was accepted in 1994 to justify a second dwelling house at that time. The scale and nature of the farm enterprise at Lochgreen would appear to have changed significantly since that time. The farm size has reduced from 181 to 31 hectares, sheep numbers have reduced from 650 to 400, and there are no longer beef cows. There are legitimate questions concerning the applicant's agent's labour calculation of 2.13 persons, given that it is higher than the 1.6 labour requirement when the farm size and stock number were significantly higher. Drawing all these points together, it is considered that it remains the case that the justification for the proposed dwelling house has not been fully demonstrated. This is despite the applicant having been provided with an opportunity to provide additional evidence and information following the committee's decision to continue the application. Fundamentally, we retain concerns regarding how strong the case is for the operational need for the proposed dwelling house, given the labour requirement under the handbook, which equates to 1 full-time and 1 part-time position, and the presence of an existing dwelling house next to the farm, which provides a presence to address any welfare needs requiring an immediate response in terms of the existing operation. The previous recommendation to refuse the application is therefore reiterated. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Questions to Brent? Anyone, any questions for the officer? No? Okay. We'll invite the Mr. Pearson to speak to us. Afternoon.
Good afternoon, thanks. My name is Ewan Pearson. I'm a chartered surveyor. I'm a member of the rural faculty, so I specialise in farm development. The issue here is, which figure do you believe is the labour requirement for this farm? So I've carried out an assessment and looked at records, including rural payments information, accounts, spoken to the farm labourer Ed Davey, who lives in Shield Hill, spoken to Mr. Haddle, and my conclusion is that the farm operates with 2 people. There's sufficient ovine numbers that 1 person could not look after 400 sheep. The application is for a house for the agricultural worker. It's not for Mr. Haddle. The planning officer has explained that Mr. Haddle lives in an adjacent property. So that is not a matter. That is not an issue. The issue here is, what is the labour requirement for this farm, and is there enough accommodation? Now, Mr. Davey works very hard. He works more than full time on this farm, but he has to travel from Shield Hill. sheep require, under the 2010 welfare regulations, constant supervision and constant attention. If we go back 30 years, there was no such welfare regulations, and people ran farms very differently, and farm practicing has moved on. So I don't know the relevance of the farm size 30 years ago, or who ran it, or what was on it. What we're looking at today is a registered holding with rural payments that has a labour requirement for 2 people. We're asking you to give Mr. Davey on-site accommodation, so he doesn't have to keep travelling from Shield Hill all the time. Or the next worker has to do that, or the one after that has to do that. I've suggested to Mr. Vivian that he puts an occupancy condition on the permission, similar to what is on Hockey Dubs Cottage. So that would prevent it from being occupied by anybody other than someone working on the farm. So just to go back to the top of what I was saying, the dispute here is that Mr. Vivian prepares the handbook figure, which is notional for new farm entrants, against the actual labour that is required to run this farm. When we submitted the application, I did submit a labour requirement assessment, but that was also backed up by a statement from Mr. Davey, and it was submitted with financial information from the accountant to confirm that Mr. Davey was paid and that he worked full time and that the business was viable. There isn't really much else we can give you in terms of how the farm operates. So I would ask you to question what's in the report. And if you've got any questions for me, by all means. But things that happened 30 years ago are not relevant to this holding. This farm has 2 people working on it, and they both should be living nearer on the farm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pearson. Anyone, any questions for Mr. Pearson? Councillor Kerr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson. With regards to, you mentioned the number of ewes, it was 400, but in the report it says 650. Is that a more accurate figure, 650? Our report says 650.
Is that not the figure that Brent Vivian gave you from 30 years ago?
650 if you just do 400.
Sorry, my misunderstanding. Right, so 400, Mr. Pearson. Is there any other animals on the farm? Because it says that the same, they're 25 cows, but I don't know if that's still in existence.
No,
this is an ovine operation. There are 2 herds, which I've given Brent Vivian the numbers for him to check, and the heads. So at the time of the application, it was 400, but we've had a lambing season now, so I suspect it's more than 400. But no, there's no other animals. The other activity is the grass silage operation. That's the only other activity on the farm.
Right, thanks very much. Being brought up in rural area, Islamanan, and surrounded by farms, understand exactly how running a farm works. But thanks for that, Mr. Pearson.
Thanks. The applicant, you were saying Mr. Haddle, he works on the farm. What age is Mr. Haddle? That's maybe a good question.
Do you know, I've never actually asked him that. I don't tend to do that with my
Sorry.
clients.
Maybe I should have rephrased that better.
I'd say, well, I mean, I'm 53, so I'd say he's older than me.
So it might be
He has grandchildren, put it that way.
retirement age at some point.
Oh yes, hopefully.
All right.
Aren't we all looking for that?
It'd even be nice.
So I was just wondering if that's his plan, if he maybe, as people get older, they might take a step back and maybe the kind of younger generation might take over the farm. So is this maybe what the plan is here, or is it just to keep the worker?
Well, what I said to the officers was that Mr. Haddle works full time, i.e. that is 35 hours a week.
Yeah.
But there has been a drifting towards more reliance on Mr. Davey to do the agricultural work.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate 400 sheep must be an awful lot of work for one person.
Well, it's not possible with one person because the welfare regulations require 24-hour supervision of animals. If it was one person, they would never sleep, they would never go on holiday, they would work 7 days a week. It's just not possible.
I suppose. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Yes.
Thanks. Mr. Davey, the assistant, lives off site at the moment within Shield Hill, and he's self-employed. So this in effect will be a tied cottage that he would be moving into. So I take it there would be some financial constraint there. And if Mr. Haddows is coming up to a retirement age, then, and he retires, Mr. Davey has then got to find someone else to help him with the flock. So that would be correct, wouldn't it?
No, Mr. Davey is, as you say, self-employed. Mr. Davey can choose to work anywhere he wants. He can choose from year to year not to work on this farm. He can go and work on another farm.
Yeah.
He can do
Okay,
whatever.
I'm just using him as an,
Right, okay.
An example.
No, he is the person. He is the second person at the moment. He would be offered this accommodation rather than have to travel from Shield Hill. If he left the business, then the next person that came in would take the accommodation.
So it is a tied cottage.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm suggesting that there would be a condition attached restricting it to occupation by agricultural worker.
I fully understand that, thank you. But what I'm also saying is that we've just ascertained that Mr. Haddle is approaching retirement age. We've also ascertained that it's a two-person job. No one person can do it. Mr. Haddle is unlikely to give up Hockey Dubs Farm cottage. So therefore, at some point, if Mr. Davey is the only person there, he's going to need help. And therefore, are we going to be in this situation? Yeah, is that? Yeah, so but maybe are we going to be in the same situation in a few years?
I do understand what you're saying. Maybe I can clarify this. So Brent Vivian, as he's already put in his report, has told you that Hockey Dubs, where Mr. Haddle lives, has an occupancy condition. Okay, right? So that can't be sold on the open market, thus creating another problem and thus another opportunity to apply for a house. Both these properties, if you were minded to grant it, would have occupancy conditions.
Thanks, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Bounds.
Thank you. Mr. Pearson, I'm sorry, I'm a city boy, so I'm the complete opposite of James. Born and bred in Mary Hill, so there wasn't a lot of farms. Okay, can you give me a better idea, because obviously these figures and what we're talking about here is a difference in the figures. So the notional figures are based on the farm management handbook. We're also provided the handbook as a budgeting book to help assessing or setting up a new farm enterprise. Can you explain that to me? Because as if it's, well, I'm a 3-year-old, to be honest with you.
Right. So you'd say you've had a change of lifestyle and you decided you don't like the urban area anymore, and you buy some fields with the intention of starting a farm. Right, whatever it is, crops, animals, it's like you will go to the handbook as a novice, to see what would be involved in doing that and the likely costs of labour, you know, what size of buildings you need, how many animals you need. That's what you look at. So it helps you budget as a new entrant into the business. That's basically what the handbook is, and it is based on practical experience across these islands, and it's agreed between all the different agricultural government ministries as a reliable document for people who want to set up new businesses, but it's equally valid if you want to diversify your business. So if you've got a cropping business and you sell all your grain to Diageo, and then suddenly you've got an opportunity to buy more fields and put cows in it, again, it helps you budget about how much labour you need. That's what it is.
Sorry, so it's telling you how many hours it would take to run a certain size of stock, a certain amount of sheep, grazing land, whatever. It tells you how many hours, or advises you how many hours that you would require to carry out that size of business. Am I right saying that's what you're thinking?
What it says is you are in for at least this trouble if this is what you're going to do. It's very heavily caveated in that it does say that each to their own circumstances, blah blah blah. You know, but it's already reckoner.
So it's not the direct It's not the direct numbers that have been recorded of labour hours working this farm. It's a book which is indicative of the time that it would take to run a certain size of farm. Is that correct?
Yes, because all farms are different.
I get that now. It's just that it's obviously that's the figures that appear to have been submitted.
No, yeah, those figures have been submitted, but there's two sets of figures which I tried to explain in the submission that I was asked to produce after the last meeting. There are two sets of figures. There's notional figures, which comes from the handbook, and there's actual figures. And the actual figures are the ones that come from the labour assessment, from looking at the business as it operates, i.e. 2 people. So if you like, the notional figure is there as a benchmark to give reassurance that this farm needs more than 1.4 people.
Thanks, Mr. Pearson. Any other questions for Mr. Pearson? Provost.
Thanks very much, Convener. I would tend to agree that the animals need 24-hour supervision. You know, so who would the guy that's looking after them? Is he responsible for contacting the vet as well if the animal's unwell? Is that one of his roles?
Anybody who is engaged in looking after the ovines is deemed to be legally responsible. So if Ed Davey is working 12 hours on Sunday, then he's responsible for everything. He contacts the vet, he records accidents, he treats the animals.
He's out, you know, he's actually basically a job description, if you like. So what is his, so that's one of his aspects of the job. He'd have to make sure, so there's time involved contacting the vet, meeting the vet on site, dealing with the animal, probably processing invoices, stuff like that. So I imagine once you start to break the job down, it's sort of breaking out how many hours is actually involved. So I can imagine it would take almost 2 people to look after 400 sheep, and applying a wee bit common sense even, and to 2 harvests of silage as well, managing that. And would he be responsible for fence repairs or equipment repairs or anything like that, or is that someone else?
No, that would be Ed Davey that does that under the direction of Mr. Haddo. You don't have a dog and wag your own tail.
Okay, so he'd be doing that as well?
Yeah, he does, and he'd be transporting animals, he'd be filling in logbooks, he'd be receiving inspections, he'd be going to buy feed, he'll be doing anything that anybody who's responsible for welfare does.
So if an animal was injured, he was off site, wouldn't he know about it? until the next day, until he arrived on site and saw the animal was unwell?
No, because there's two labourers, there's two people working on the farm, where Mr. Haddle's not working on the farm, Mr. Davies working on the farm, and vice versa. So someone always has to be there looking after the welfare, doing regular inspections. So there's got to be 24 hour, that's the regulations. You can't just leave the animals for 6 hours and go away and come back again.
So if Mr. Haddle became ill,
well then Mr. Haddle
would have to do the whole lot.
Mr. Haddle would have to get another labourer, a temporary labourer, to come in if he was ill.
Okay.
Just like if Mr. Davy was ill, Mr. Haddle would have to go and get another source of temporary
Ensure
labour.
there's two people there looking after the sheep.
Well, no, there's. No, what I'm trying to explain is there's 24-hour welfare required.
Okay.
One person can't do that 24 hours a day. So if you have two people, it's like 12 hours a day.
To ensure you've got the 24-hour coverage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks,
For that size of, for those size of that number of ovine. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Provost. Councillor Kerr.
Just a clarity from Mr. Pearson. The summary that he sent in the email, Mr. Pearson, was very helpful with regards to, and you state that you previously provided the plan office with actual labour figures for 2021, which clearly states that the requirement is 2.13 persons for the farm. Is that correct?
The 2.13 is actually what happens at the moment.
Yeah.
It's not notional, it's actual. Mr. Davey is paid for all those hours and Mr. Haddle works all those hours as set out.
I'm quite happy with your figures, Mr. Pearson.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to make sure the clarification of that. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Any more? No. Thanks, Mr. Pearson. You can resume to your seat. Okay, do we want to continue discussion this? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Can I pose that question to Mr. Vivian then? Clearly,
certainly.
All right.
Yeah.
Clearly, Mr. Pearson's figures have came from actual labour figures from the accountant and the hours that Mr. Davey and Mr. Haddle work. So, are you disputing the figures, Mr. Vivian, or are you just going with the guidance?
No, we're not not disputing them. Mr. Pearson had said that. Right, I've got an echo. I don't know when anyone else has got an echo, but yeah, I'll carry on. Mr. Pearson had suggested that I was preferring the notional figures under the handbook. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, it is my experience from previous applications that whether it's an existing business or a new enterprise, it is the handbook coefficient calculations which are presented to us. I haven't actually come across an application where we've been given actual figures, which is the case here. But notwithstanding that, we had questions around trying to understand the calculations behind the actual figures, and that was really, we were just seeking some clarification on what elements of labour input made up the actual labour calculations. The breakdown we have received in relation to that factors in directed in hours towards sheep breeding and also towards silage, as Mr. Pearson mentioned. The gap in terms of what we were looking for was an explanation of what has been put down as 233 hours attributed to the farm labourer as miscellaneous uses, and the other gap appears to be in relation to quite a significant number of the hours attributed to the farm manager. So I was really just trying to understand, from our perspective, you know, not being specialists in this field, how this actual labour requirement has been calculated as a means to try to understand the application and potentially, you know, potentially even support it. But unfortunately, we haven't quite reached that stage because the information that has come back to us hasn't given us the clarification that we were looking for in terms of those gaps which I mentioned.
Thanks, Mr. Vivian. So probably, in my eyes, what the Provost was asking Mr. Pearson was, what does Mr. Davy do? Repairs fences, does everything general, and as I said previously, I've got friends who are farmers, I've got friends who work on the farm, and as Mr. Pearson says, the legislation in 2010 requires 24-hour cover for the welfare of the animals, but it's just no animals that these farm workers look after. They are having to hear a job for all the money in the world because of the amount of work and the amount of time that's spent. They just didn't look after the welfare. There is numerous jobs they do in and around the farm. So what is basically doing to us, whether we agree with the figures that Mr. Pearson's submitted, that according to according to law, that it needs the 2010 Act, that it needs 24-hour cover. And are we satisfied that one person could do that? Personally, no. No. So, thanks, Mr. Vivian. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Anyone else? I think it's very difficult, this one, because we're relying on real figures against balancing it with book figures. And I think perhaps, as Councillor Kerr said, it's very difficult to try and say, oh, he does 10 hours mending fences or 10 hours cutting silage, you know, so it's pretty well and how we accept it. So any more questions on it?
Convener,
yourself.
Given what we've heard, then I think it definitely needs 2 people to manage these sheep in that farm and all the other activities that goes along with it in terms of 24-hour supervision. So having heard what I've heard from Mr. Pearson and having read the notes, I'm minded to grant the application, so I'd move that we grant it.
I would second that. Given what I've heard, I would second that.
We've got a seconder, we've got a motion and a seconder, and you're another seconder. Mr. Secretary.
It was, thanks, Deputy Convener. It was just more of an observation than anything else. I am in no way an expert on how a farm should and can be run. Genuine apologies to Mr. Pearson here. I thought he referred to bovine rather than ovine, and I had to Google the difference and see what was going on here. And I thought, well, it says in the report there's no bovines, but there isn't. It's ovine, which is sheep, which is every day's a school day, I suppose. I think there's probably more reasons within the report that Mr. Vivian's got before us that would say refusal as planning permission as separate from the working constraints or the management constraints of the farm. But in saying that, I'm not sure where the balance is, and I genuinely don't know myself personally whether or not I would support these or support the opposite to grant. It's a difficult one because there seems to be so many strands to this, and given that it doesn't accord with several policies within the LDP, other than the workforce constraints. It's a difficult one. So that was just my observation where that's concerned. So thank you for being indulgent.
Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Steenbein.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Convener. I think as has been mentioned, I think it was important to listen comprehensively to what Mr. Pearson had to say, and the planning officer. I feel satisfied with the information given by Mr. Pearson. That it satisfies a lot of the planning policies in relation to countryside development, and it's essential. So I'm quite happy to support the motion to grant permission, obviously with the caveats that Mr. Henderson still to clarify the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steenbein. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Convener. I think we have a motion by Provost Bissett, seconded by Councillor Forrest, to grant permission, and that was on the basis that the committee would consider that it's been satisfactorily demonstrated, almost turning the refusal reason round, that the committee considers it's been satisfactorily demonstrated that there is a requirement for a new home to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business at Lochgreen Farm, and there is an essential need for a worker to live there permanently. Just on a couple of points, and one I mentioned earlier is, I'm presuming in terms of that motion that members are comfortable with the scale, design and materials, etc. of the building that's proposed. And on that point, I might bring in Mr. Vivian, if that's okay. I noted at one of the paragraphs in the report, if I could find it, yes, paragraph 7A5, that there was reference to the use of slate rather than a tile roof, and details of external finishes could be the subject of a planning condition. So I'm not leading anything, but I was just wondering if Mr. Vivian was able to expand on the thinking behind that comment.
Yeah, of course. We do have elevations showing proposed external finishes. Generally, in a countryside context, we'd be looking for traditional materials. There's a suggestion in the original report for the use of a slate rather than a tile for the roof finish. I don't recall any specific discussion with the agent on that point, but certainly there's an opportunity to detail the to condition the detail of the external finishes as part of any approval of the application.
Thank you. And putting myself in the hands of members, would it be sufficient simply to narrate that there would be a condition that would detail the external finishes? Thank you. Another point I was just going to pick up with the committee is something that Mr. Pearson mentioned, and that was an occupancy restriction being applied. Now, I put this in the context of the Chief Planner's advice of probably 2011, as I recall, which advised against occupancy restrictions. They can lead to difficulties in the future for parties. So there is a general Scottish Minister's advisory against such conditions, but it has been proposed. And it was just to clarify whether the committee would wish an occupancy restriction, or if the committee is happy to grant permission without such a restriction, bearing in mind the Chief Planner's guidance.
Mr Henderson, did we not actually overturn one quite recently? An occupancy restriction?
We did.
There was indeed an application for discharge of an occupancy restriction, which the committee agreed, but I feel bound and it's incumbent upon me to raise the point.
Can I just come in there just quickly just to clarify that? I think what Mr Henderson said there is right, but obviously it's also to do with planning obligations, legal agreements more tied in, but occupancy conditions can still be attached, although it's something that clearly we have to take cognizance of. What you did here this morning, obviously, he was willing to accept that. So again, obviously, clearly at a point in time that condition could apply to be removed, but it is whether it's guidance from the Chief Planner, it's only guidance, and there will be some situations that you may feel that you think an occupancy condition, would be applicable. So it can still be done. It's not actually.
I know I'm not proposing this, but I would probably prefer to see that in rather than out.
I think you've heard the Regents willing to accept that and offer that, so I think it would be competent for the committee then to consider placing a condition on that, and it would not be against any of the, the guidance out there. You have to look at each case in its merits, but generally speaking, it can still be done.
Okay, Councillor Kerr, you?
I'm content with that. I was going to say leave it out, but
I think just. And our seconder.
Happy to. Yeah.
Happy to leave.
Happy to leave
out
yeah.
an occupancy restriction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No.
Well, I endeavour to summarise matters here. We have a motion which I think has general agreement that committee agrees that it's minded to grant planning permission for the development on the basis that committee agrees that it's been satisfactorily demonstrated that there is a requirement for a new home to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business at Lochgreen Farm, and there is an essential need for a worker to live there permanently. And the committee is satisfied as to the scale, design and layout of the proposed development, and that it will harmonise with the surrounding area, just looking at the wording in the report, and that would be a grant subject to appropriate conditions as determined by the Director of Police Services, including a condition in relation to external materials.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that accepted then by the committee?
Agreed.
Thank you. And that'll bring us to the end of business. Thank you very much for attending. Look forward to the next one.